May the words of my mouth and the meditation of mine heart be acceptable in Yahweh's sight. He is our strength and our redeemer, and it is in his name, which is his authority, that we pray, praise, proclaim, project, and protect today's message. Amen. Barakallah Sham Yahweh. Kwame Yashdel, Tada. Anai Kofi. Headed up Servants of Christ. Mashallah Khe. Hello, everybody. I'm Pastor Kofi, Pastor Servants of Christ, where we are always changing lives one mind at a time by being the voice of the voices and speaking the unspoken. Come on in. Thank you so much for being on with us. We appreciate you joining us one more again. And we're excited to be able to spend some time with you again. Thank you again for being on with us. We appreciate you. We give all honor and praise to the Most High. We give all praise and honor to him for my wife, the Honorable Maya, who lives a life that's able to be honored. You can check her out on TikTok, YouTube, her website, and Pinterest at Bloom and Flourish. Not A&D, the letter N, Bloom and Flourish. She is a healer, herbalist, chemist, and biologist by degree. And we thank you for being on. To the moderators who I bow down to, appreciate you. Do what you guys do. Thank you so much for being on. And to Lottie Dottie and everybody, thanks for joining us again for another conversation, one that will be nuanced, which you will see is important to our conversation in a little bit. Thank you to everybody for being on. We appreciate you today. As a reminder, once again, we are trying to raise some money for a single father going through some stuff with his children, who has just lost his job. And so if you're able to help us out, we're trying to be able to give donations to this person from today all the way through the day of Pentecost. So if you'd like to be able to help us in our endeavor to help our brother, please feel free to reach out and do so. Y'all know how to do so already. And if you do not, you can always reach out in a little bit. We'll give some information on how you can be able to reach out and get more information if you'd like to, because we don't like to give people's personal business or names and all that stuff on here. But thank you for being on. We appreciate you so very much. Thank you to everybody for being on. And tonight, I want to talk about we need to have more nuance in these conversations, a more nuanced conversation. More nuance is required. More nuance is required. Now, this started tonight from somebody who asked me a question, so we're going to get into it. But before we get started, I apologize. Let's say hello to everybody real quick. How you doing, Sister Denise? How you doing, Sister Tori? The Truth, Sister Renee. If I miss your name, charge it to my head, not to my heart, by the way. We appreciate everybody on TikTok and YouTube. How you doing, Jaguar, Sister Elion, Sister Monica, The Truth. I know Play, Molly, Darius, 3661385. Hello, Minister Joseph, Nurse Betty, Kat. How you doing? Everybody on here, we appreciate you so very much. Will Walk, Romac, everybody. We thank you so much. I think I said Shalom Darius as well. And we appreciate your presence. So today we need more nuance. More nuance is needed. More nuance is required in these conversations. This started off today as far as what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, J-Mag, have fun out there. This started tonight because somebody who's part of what we do sent me a link, as many of you do, to look at, and asked what I thought about it, and sent him a text message. But I said this would actually be something we can possibly talk about this evening. And then as we got closer to this evening, I've been talking about nuance all day and figured let's just go ahead and dive into this conversation. You're the one that wrote on Facebook earlier. Okay, well, thank you so much. I apologize. I don't know if we had a chance to catch up on everything on Messenger. If I did, please forgive me right now for not even, or if I didn't respond to you or whatever. But somebody sent me a text message. And so as I was looking at this, how you doing, Sage? They sent me something about Tartarians. Now, I'm not sure. Apparently, this is something that's popular or gaining popularity online to speak on the Tartarians. If you don't know what that is, I guess it's spelled Tartaria, or Tartarian would be Tartarian, or something along those lines. But talking about the Tartarians, and sent me a video. So I watched it and then began to do my research. I had heard about Tartarians, but it's been a while. And it got to a point to where you start realizing that nuance is very much so required in everything that we talk about, right? In everything we talk about, and thank y'all for the love, appreciate it. In everything that we discuss, we must make sure that we are always looking at the nuance of things. We must always look at context, right? And a lot of people, we must look at the gray area, if you will. It's not always black or white. And so as I looked up Tartarians and you looked up certain pictures of them, and you begin to see these people that were there who either get conquered, washed away, or are the people turned into another type of people? How you doing, Minister Tamara? And one of the things that I really began to comprehend is that we don't have much nuance. So what the conversation turned into was before the Tartarian or before Russians got to Russia, the Tartarians lived in Russia. And what's being told and what's being used now is that it was it was all black, it was black people were everywhere, which by the way, in a sense is correct, but just roll with me for a second. Black people being everywhere. We were in Russia. We who were in Russia were known as Tartarians. Russians came in, took your land. And what happens then is you start to see this whole thing, and now where people are starting to say, so you must comprehend that's what they did to everybody. And the cross isn't real, it's just a symbolization of the fact that they hung you on trees. And you must get to a place where you realize that not only that, but the Tartarians were the Titans. So now we're mixing in Greek mythology. Of course, then that gets some people to go to the book of Enoch. And as much as I would like to be the first person to be like, okay, somebody solved it, there's a lot of holes, right? How you doing, Misunderstood Shalom? There's a lot of holes. And what's begun to happen is we have begun to go from theory to theory, kind of like what we talked about this rising. If you remember, we said a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck because a lot of people don't manage, right? And so lack of management for a lot of people gives way to them thinking that, like, people live paycheck to paycheck. Many people try to live miracle to miracle rather than to manage in between the miracles, right? So instead of being miracle to miracle and hoping that something happens and hoping Yah has to always put his hand on there, if you would manage some things, right, some things would just happen because of laws and principles. Well, kind of the same thing with the story of mankind, where we begun to get to these weird places in these, if you want to call them racial discussions, or if you want to call it discussions on the lost books, even what are the lost books, because now pretty much anything that's not in the Bible, any scroll we can find, we just start saying it's a lost book. And not necessarily so, right? And then we're not even looking to see who is actually leading the conversation. So you can see a picture of a Tartarian. And a Tartarian, you see, okay, they were darker skinned. They were drawn as people who had, darker features. They were even known by some people as the natives of a certain area. Problem with all this is, though, is that they weren't even the natives of Russia. The people that were called Tartarian, even though they would have been what you would call today black people in Russia, before Russians were in there, right? And by the way, Russians have no problem with that, because even though Russians do have issues with what you would call racism, it's not as based off of skin color as you might think. There are people that don't like black people, but there's more Caucasians that deal with racism against certain Russian tribes. And if you don't even know the difference, right? Caucasian doesn't mean white. Caucasian is not code for white people. There's not proper etymology for anybody that you deem as white. And by the way, there's no real such thing as a white person, because now you got black people trying to identify with white when white people started changing definitions in the 1800s. But see, we have to have a very nuanced conversation, because if we don't have a nuanced conversation, then we just keep going in circles. And we keep going in circles because every time you get, remember, this is a Willie Lynch tool. This is a tool of the enemy. This is a tool in Deuteronomy 28. Every time you get closer to knowing yourself, somebody puts something else in the recipe. Every time you get close to finding the truth, somebody puts something else in the pot. And when the taste is changed just enough, it makes you rethink the whole recipe. Right? So yeah, and even Caucasian people from the Caucasus Mountains does not always mean they were what we would call today white. And remember, there technically is no such color as white, because white would be the absence of color, for it to be clear, for it to be see-through, for it to be reflective, right? But it's not, there's not a color, right? Whiteout covers up color. So we have to get to a place, because in word game Israel, right? Because there's a lot of spells and spelling going on that gets you off and getting us to stay in cognitive dissonance, where we're holding on to beliefs that conflict with one another so much that we actually can't have nuanced conversation. This is why, once again, nuance is necessary. This is why we always talk about there's no such thing as, or at least there should not be, a such thing as context without facts, or such thing as facts without context. Contextual facts is what's going to get us to where we need to be. So without nuance, without looking at the details, we're going to have an issue. All right. So even if you deal with this thing called Tartarians are not even from Russia. Tartarian was a word that was used mostly by Europeans, by the way. So once again, you're looking at a Eurocentric lens to try and say this is what we called ourselves. We didn't call ourselves Tartarians. It's like when people say you're Iroquois. We didn't call ourselves Iroquois. We called ourselves Haudenosaunee, or at least the ones of us that lived up near the Lakota people and others, right? But you'll hear somebody else call, like, we didn't call ourselves Cherokee. We were Anakitawaya. Maybe you even want to call us Tisalagi. Maybe even realize we were mixed with some Taino. Maybe even realize that we came across Jamaicans, because Jamaicans aren't just people that lived in Jamaica. That was what somebody else named it, knowing that they knew that Jamaicans went all the way from North America, as you know it, all the way down the East Coast, even into the Caribbean. So in many different ways, the Arawak, which is another word that wasn't necessarily ours in the beginning. Arawak, by the way, is a catch-all phrase. Just like Aztec is a catch-all phrase, a bunch of different tribes are known as Aztec. Right? How you doing, Sweet Pea? How you doing, Miss Pierce? Right? So a lot of different people are known as Arawak. A lot of different people are known as, and by the way, Haudenosaunee, or who you call Iroquois, there's several tribes that came together under a treaty. And what you know is the Confederate flag was actually taken from them. We used to have the same red X, if you will. That was on our flag. And we're the only confederacy, right? Natives are the only confederacies that were ever actually accepted by law, right? The Confederacy of the United States, right? The Confederacy that went against the United States, excuse me, they were never accepted by anybody. They were never made sovereign. How you doing, Austin? How you doing, Jermaine? So you see, it's very nuanced when we start talking about this. It's like, for example, you got to be careful, even if you don't know which tribe you're from. Not just if you're white or not, you have to be careful wearing a headdress if you're native. Why is that? Because if you wear a headdress, people make the mistake of thinking everybody wore headdresses. That's not something that's germane to everybody. That's not something that is essential to everybody. That's not something that even everybody had that in their culture. The headdress of feathers and stuff, first of all, is something that you should earn. You have to go through rite of passage, so to speak. How you doing, Sister Nadine? Right? You got to go through a rite of passage to even get to a place. How you doing, Mr. 252? See, and so we're having conversations without being nuanced. So just because you're native doesn't mean you wear a headdress, and just because you might be a part of the groups of people that wore headdresses doesn't mean you get to wear it. You have to go through something making you worthy of being able to put that on. Right. But going back to the Tartarian real quick, see, this is why when I started research, I realized the necessity to talk about nuance and remind us, don't just go for everything. Study and look for the nuances, the little things here or there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how you doing, David? Yeah. So yeah, depending on which headdress you're talking about, right? So even the headdresses don't always look the same. But right, so you have to know the context. But go back to the Tartarian. Tartarians aren't even considered to be Russians. They were considered to be what you might call Central Asians. Maybe a touch of Africa because they went into it, but they're considered to be Central Asians. Like, by the way, if you hear the word Celtic, a lot of you think Celtic people are only in Ireland or only around Irish or one of the Irish tribes, by the way, because there are many Celtic languages, which means there are many Celtic tribes. But the word Celtic initially actually comes out of those who were Japhetic. And there was a tribe of people within Japhet that were Celtic and were not necessarily white people. And they had spread all the way from Africa, going on up through Asia, and going up through Europe, and going up into Ireland. So Celtic people used to be all over the place. Over time and over wars and stuff, they began to diminish and be killed off, or just mix into other people's cultures so much that now many people wouldn't even consider themselves to be Celtic at all. How you doing, Sister Nadine? How you doing, Don? Don the one. So nuance is important in all these conversations. You have all these people that start going here and going there and telling you this is what this person is, and this is what this means, and this is what, and you are the Titans, and it's like Titans are a Greek thing. We didn't even use a word called Titan. How were we considered to be the Titans, and we never called ourselves the Titans? Now, this is where it gets nuanced as well, because the people that we consider to be Greek, the further back you go, the Romans, Greeks, many, matter of fact, any of us, the further back we go in the story of mankind, the darker we all become. Now, there were outliers as far as albinoism, or outliers as far as certain things that happen to the skin due to sin. And sin just means anything missing the mark. So I'm not trying to say because you're white, if you're going using that colonial social construct. I'm not trying to say because of your whiteness, you're evil. Hear what I'm saying? When sin entered, sin didn't just begin to mean that you were separated from Yah. It meant even your flesh was messed up, correct? There was no such thing as sickness before sin. Sickness is a watch this. Sickness is sin, not because you're doing anything on purpose, but it falls short. You're not meeting, you miss the mark. Being somebody who has shortcomings in any way, shape, or form means you are in sin. That's why the Bible says now you are what? You are shaped. You were shaped, you were molded, you were shaped in iniquity. There's not one person on here, as perfect as you might think you are, there's not one person on here that makes it a whole day without in some way, shape, or form missing the mark. When you miss the mark, by definition, you would be sinning. Right? Now, prayerfully, what we've done is we've set up laws and commandments and a lifestyle and what's the word I'm looking for? Habits so much in our life that we have gotten to a place to where sin is not that easy. It does not so easily beset us, right? But we all are dealing with that, right? Including in these conversations. So now that we get to the point of conversation, like it's pretty easy to realize some certain things. For example, what you think, see, you got to get out of this, you have to be more nuanced, see, because stop thinking that all skin folk are kinfolk. Stop thinking that all white people must be evil. Stop thinking that there's a such thing as a white person. The people that you consider to be Roman, a lot of them would not be considered what you consider to be white. It's a very nuanced conversation. They're right. The people that are in Rome now, don't make the mistake of thinking that the people that are in Rome now were always the people of Rome. Or even if some of the people that are there come from some of these people, don't make the mistake of believing that this means that everybody who was there looked that way. Right? For example, we don't know exactly what color Noah was as far as how light or dark he was, but Noah, who is somebody who we come out of, but Noah himself, when you read about Noah, right? Especially in the books outside the 66 books, when you read about Noah, Noah was not somebody who looked like us. I know that messes some people up because some of us are afraid to say, well, if Noah didn't look like us, then that means that people that don't look like us must be better than us in some weird correlation we're making there. Right? But this is nuance. We know what the children of Yashda'al look like, but it's a birthright that we have. Right? The birthright that we have is not because of our color. The birthright that we have is because of Abraham's faithfulness, because of Isaac's faithfulness, because of Israel's faithfulness. And so now we can see who we're supposed to be, but we're not who we are because we are white, or because we are black, or because we are Asian, or because that's not what our birthright involves. Now, if you want to see signs that I might be that people, well, yeah, you can look at my hair. And yes, you can look at my skin. And yes, you can look at what's documented and was drawn out there to say, well, this is what these people look like, et cetera, right? But the color that I am is not telling you automatically I'm holy, because there's many different African tribes that by your canon, you would say they're not holy. So we have to have a nuanced conversation. Nuance is necessary. Nuance is required in this. Because as you said, and thank you, Kendrick, yeah, Noah was an albino. Now, exactly how much albinoism hit him, we don't know. But we know that Noah was the first baby that Lamech had ever seen like that. Lamech, Noah's father, had the first baby he'd ever seen like that. He was terrified, petrified. And he went and talked to his father, Methuselah. Remember, Methuselah, part of Methuselah's name actually means one who points to, or arrow that's a javelin even that's thrown in direction. He's throwing a direction. He's supposed to know the target. So Noah is the target. Something's going to happen with Noah. And if you know what really happened, Methuselah and Noah preached together. Methuselah would have looked darker. Noah would have looked whatever form of albinism he had. Right? And how you doing, Sister Kimberly? How you doing, Sister Deborah? So we make this mistake of thinking this person. So if you're dealing with albinism, or if you're dealing with people who have less melanin, and by the way, melanin comes in different shades too. But if you're dealing with albinism, doesn't mean that somebody's not who you are. See the nuance you got to have? There's a lot of people who are albino Nigerian. There's a lot of people who there's people who come from blue black families, if you know what that is. There's actually people so dark that they show blue hue towards them or out of their skin, right? Blue hue, a blue tint, a blue color comes out because they're so dark skinned. So they're known as blue blacks, right? Not making that up, not coming from somebody else. That's what we would call ourselves, right? They would call themselves blue black, all right? So even with them being blue black, they can still have an albino child. And even though the albino child could come out albino, it doesn't mean that the child wouldn't be blue black. And it doesn't mean if the albino child had a baby that all of the babies have to be albino. You know that, right? Like some of the babies will carry some albinism. Most of them wouldn't. Depending on how many babies they have is how many you can start to compare. But percentage wise, it's going to be more that go back to their original intent than there are that carry the albinism. So even when you start talking about color, you got to be careful with that, because you're still dealing with people that are all one. Now, here's something that's nuanced that a lot of people don't want to go into. And this is something that I'm going to be honest with you. This is not something that I have aha moments and paperwork to back it up and all these scholars that write about it, because sometimes if you know enough stuff, you can kind of stumble upon some truth. If you have enough sources in you, you can become a source to a certain degree. And one thing, right? Well, the Eve gene, as far as how they describe it, anything can come out of certain women, right? They can make any color come out of them, but somebody who's of a certain race, I guess. I'm trying to stay away from that word, but we'll just use it. From a certain race, they can't, right? Make things, or really of many different races, including some of the races you consider to be black, right? But nevertheless, I forgot what I was saying. I'm sorry. Where are we going? Nuance is necessary. Oh, here's part of the conversation that we have to have. Thank you, Holy Spirit. We have to have a conversation about the fact that if we're going to be honest, one of the reasons why you're having some of this stuff revisited on you, right? One of the reasons why you're having this stuff revisited on you and coming back upon you, if we be honest, is you're dealing with the fact that, we were scared of and didn't like people who were albino. I know you don't want to hear that, because we can't in any way, shape, or form be bigoted. But the reality is that many of us are dealing with a lot of different stuff where we're not being honest about the fact that still to this day, you go to certain places in Africa and certain places even in the Caribbean too, but certain places in Africa you go to, and you will discover that if somebody has an albino child, sometimes the family will take the albino child to a witch and have ceremonies and stuff done, might even allow the witch to sacrifice it because it's supposed to be cursed. They call it an it, not a he, not a she. Did you catch that? Right? That stuff happens over and over again. And you have children, your children, who came out of you and went somewhere and were fatherless. They were bastardized. They didn't learn our customs, traditions, and ways and culture. And by the time we gave it to them, they had made whole societies that were so opposite and so much into survival rather than being what we were called to be. That when you tried to teach them, they were too far gone. They had a culture that was too far removed from what you had. So when you're dealing with some of this stuff, you got to realize that some of this stuff is not as simple as just like, oh, these people just popped up. This is what people want you to believe or want you to think, or hey, there's not, like, we are the only people that were here. Now it's turned into we all came from the sky. Now black people have become Anunnaki. Nobody came from Earth. Forget what Yahweh Elohim did. Now he's just like what the Mormons say. He was just from another planet. NOI does the same thing. When you die, if you're holy or whatever, you get to go on the spaceship. The mothership, as P-Funk would call it. Y'all didn't know when he was telling you to tear the roof off the mother sucker, he was telling you about he was telling you about something that people believe in. He said, and listening to Pastor Gino Jennings, he stresses on the head covering, and so I covered not knowing the culture. Yeah, and I get what he's trying to do as far as they believe that certain women are shamed. Also, Gino comes a little bit out of NOI as well, right? So he carries some things that are not necessarily because of the Bible, right? Gino Jennings has a lot of great things to say, by the way. I don't have to agree on everything to be able to say he's a great man, especially in his teaching and apologetically speaking. He's doing a lot of valuable stuff for us. So I want to make that clear. I'm not. People come on here all the time. Are you under Gino Jennings? If you're not under Gino Jennings, this is not to explain. Well, I don't have to be under Gino Jennings to respect him. Same thing. I don't have to agree with him and everything to respect him. But it's once again culture. It's nuanced, right? It's very nuanced. How you doing, Samela Ray, or MIT Samela Ray? Um, and I apologize. I should have checked in with you. Well, I don't know if I did or didn't, but I'll try to shoot you a message or something just to see how things are going. But yeah, we need to have we need to recognize that there's a lack of nuance in these conversations. There's a lack of context. There's a lack of, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? And by the way, so that means that, for example, if Romans had slaves and made slaves out of Israelites, it doesn't mean that it was the evil white man who enslaved Israel. It doesn't mean the Gentiles were white. It doesn't mean the Gens were white. It doesn't necessarily mean that pagans were white, because even when you get into the Druids got what they did over from the land of Canaan, and over time it made its way over. So even when you're talking about Druid stuff, or you're talking about the five, that make up the circle of witchcraft, somebody stays in the center and they have earth, wind, water, fire, and spirit. So literally they try to make sure that they absorb somebody's spirit with the earth, wind, water, and fire, that they might be able to create something that they would be able to control or craft or manipulate or inherit. You said the Roman Empire was pretty multi-ethnic empire. Well, once again, if you're talking about the Roman Empire, technically, well, it depends on how we're doing that. If you know what a European is, like the original Europe, the word Europa used to mean, and I know there's people that will tie it to a nature, or try to call it a god, a deus, a deity, etc. But a European used to just mean anything that belonged to Rome, right? So you could be Roman eventually if you want to. You could like be Roman by by becoming part of their civilization and becoming a Roman citizen, becoming part of the public. But yeah, Rome. But once again, Rome is not as simple. Like we say, it's very nuanced. So Rome is not as. First of all, Rome was somebody that always took from other cultures. If you just study Rome, period, no matter what color you're talking about, they might have fought against. What color the people were they fought against? Romans were people that were about taking over. Started off with the fact that they didn't respect women and were more into each other. This is what they write in their own annals of history, that they were more into each other as men. And so they kind of didn't have women for a little while and didn't have to start conquering people to make sure they had women and children. And it went from that to, all right, then we just start conquering over and over again. And they wouldn't even go overseas, because for them and their culture, to be Roman and to go on the water was considered to kind of be like weak stuff. You don't go in the water, you don't fight in the water. But then when you need to fight the Carthaginians, guess what you need to do? You need to become great at fighting in the water, even if it means that you kill off waves and waves and waves and waves of men that you're throwing at the Carthaginians, until you finally have it to where one of the Carthaginian ships come in and you're able to reverse engineer it. Right. So there's a lot of different things that pop up, right? And so there's nuance, and that's all I'm trying to say with all the stuff we're talking about. I mean, it's not really focused in one area tonight. I just really want to get you to focus on nuance. Nuance is key. Nuance is heavy. The little nooks and crannies of things. That's why man should not live by bread alone, but what by every word. It's not about a little thing here or there. Like nuance is extremely key. It's like even when I was talking with my wife earlier, we were talking about makeup, and I was telling her, I was saying, makeup, even for people in Kemet, for example, if I were to just deal with the different rulers of Kemet, they don't all wear their makeup the same. She was like, what? I was like, yeah, they like different dynasties sometimes would come from different families altogether. And so sometimes people would come in and want stuff to look like what they wanted it to look like. And it didn't mean that just because everybody who was royal, or they themselves who might be the only one that wore their makeup like that or whatever. It's, we have this different mindset now, right? Like if you go to different tribes, I've said this before, sisters, you go to different tribes, you'll see that if they have their head wrap, in one culture, it might mean something completely different than the way they wrap their head somewhere else. And the 2-year-old wraps her head different than the 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old wraps her head different than the 18-year-old. The 18-year-old wraps her head different than the married woman. The married woman wraps her head different than the matriarch, and the matriarch wraps her head different than royalty, and royalty wraps their head different than the queen. Like, it's very nuanced, and we're so busy trying to be catch-all and everything. Everything must be either white or black. Everything must be Kemet. Everything must be Kush. Everything must be this one tribe, and it's like, it's bigger than that. It's very nuanced. That's why, once again, when I do a lot of this stuff, I try to come from a perspective of where I try to tell people and teach people, I can't be everybody's savior, because I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, I uphold a culture, and my culture and the standard that I'm under, that's why I understand it. And I'm under a certain standard. That standard that I've decided to stay under, it's not everybody's standard. And that's all right. Like, when I go, if I go into a place and it's an Irish standard, if I go somewhere and it's a Scottish standard, if I go somewhere and it's a Montserrat standard, if I go somewhere and it's a Canadian standard, if I go somewhere and it's Montreal standard, if I go somewhere it's Le Français, if I go somewhere and it's Espanol, right? Wherever I go, there's a standard, and I respect it. And if I can't respect it, then I need not go. It's very nuanced. You've been taught there's 3 different forms of melanin. The different combinations create skin colors and body odors. Yeah, yeah, and even in that, I think melanin is still sometimes even over simplified. But yeah, right. You said Romans were subjected to defeat by white people. Once again, if that's what we're doing, but once again, remember, there's technically no such thing as a white person, because for you to be white means you can't be melanated at all. Somebody thinks that means that your skin color is light, or that you're albino. No, without melanin, you can't live. So by definition, there can't be a white person. The white person wasn't existed until there was somebody who wanted you to believe that the absence of color was purity. The whiter you were. That's why a lot of these paintings that you see of, quote, white people, unquote, a lot of these paintings that you see, older paintings, 1500s, 1600s, these are people that are in makeup. A lot of the portraits that you see, these are people that are in makeup. They're wearing makeup specifically to even take away more color. And the fact that many of them might have had imperfections on the skin, but see, when you wore makeup in Kemet, that's not where you wore makeup. If you even wore makeup. Like, you go back, like when I go back home, like, I have to be reminded by sisters, right? Because sometimes we come bearing gifts and stuff, and we'll have gifts for the community. And sometimes we mess around, bring some makeup back or whatever. And a lot of the sisters are like, I've never worn makeup before. I don't even know how to apply it. Right? So you gotta buy something else. You said everybody was black. Well, Gunner, hold on there. Hold on to your horses and listen, right? I just said that no matter how light somebody is, there's no such thing as a white person, because everybody that exists has melanin, right? So if everybody that exists has melanin, that means you have melanin. Now, why you need to be known as something that's the absence of color, or something that's as white as the wall behind me, or something that's as white as what's on there, I don't know why you need to be known as that. You need to ask yourself why you're trying to be labeled by the Pope, because the Pope back in the day was somebody that told you, oh, you need to be white and go fight people that didn't look like you. But the reality is that, there's no such thing. There's no such person who is white by definition. You said you're not that great at putting it on either. Yeah. Some, I don't even know what's better, what's righteous, what's not, et cetera. It's not right. But I'm just trying to say, you said, oh, my effing, stop telling everybody. Once again, I didn't say that everybody was black, did I? Pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention. I didn't say that. See, that's the philosophy that you have, because people that you come out of, or the people that you're fighting for, or whatever side of the discussion you want to be on, because I'm not on either side. I'm just looking for truth. Truth means that wherever I am, if I'm 3/4 of the way to the right, then I'm going to be on the right. If I'm 2/10 of the way to the left, then let me be on the left. If I'm just going to be smack dab in the middle, let me be in the middle. But I never said that everybody. See what I'm saying? There's no nuance. Did you catch it? There's zero nuance that you guys bring to the table. You're not able to have nuanced conversation. You just want to tell somebody that they don't know. You said when you use to describe white, we don't mean like snow. Well, even I mean, well, I don't know exactly what you mean, but let me because I didn't read it correctly. But let me say it like this: snow is not white, even by what you think. Once again, this is the definition of white. White, before somebody changed it into you believing that you are a white person, this is the definition of white, right? This is what we're using as far as what actually was there, what some of these people who you believe to be white, even the ones that look like what you think white people look like, they still wouldn't call themselves that. Somebody just started telling you to call yourself that. Just like many people who call themselves black, there are tribes out there who call themselves black, but but many of the people who call themselves black, you're not from those tribes. So let me help you. The definition of white, before somebody changes it for you, it means to be clear. It means to be copper colored. I'm sorry, but I'm getting myself mixed up. It means to be clear. It means to be the absence of color. It means to be see-through. It means to be bright. It wasn't until a pope who wanted you to fight the Crusades told you that the less color something had, the more pure it was, that started you on your way to eventually, in the last 300-400 years, to start identifying people as white. There's no such thing as a white person. Even these people who you claim to be white, don't they have pink? Don't they cherish pink and red roses, red rosy cheeks and stuff like that? Right? Do they not like it when they get a tan and they get some color where the melanin is stimulated somewhat? You see what I'm saying? So there's no such thing. And we're going through this weird conversation because there's no nuance. It's not that your problem is not with me. I'm not your enemy. I'm not here telling you that every person. Matter of fact, every person that exists, this is just science, including white scientists, because that's the term you want to fight for. Even white scientists will tell you this, that the further back you go into mankind, the darker that everybody gets. That's everybody on the planet, which means that points to us all being one anyways, correct? And the person who's arguing that, isn't your argument that we should be human beings and be humane? Isn't that your argument anyways? And before you came on, see, if you would have asked versus saying, stop saying blah, blah, and cursing or bleeping yourself, I appreciate you for at least bleeping yourself. But before you use ad hominem to be able to produce whatever win that you need, because I don't care about winning. You can be right. I'm trying to be righteous. I'm not concerned about winning an argument. What I want to do is have a conversation about nuance. And you're proving that we can't have proper conversation because you're proving that people lack the ability to look at details. Right? Like, I've shown people this before and stuff. People have been around here long enough with me for years now. I've shown people this stuff. If you look at a picture of my mother, many of you would assume that she is white. And if you look at my facial features next to my mother's, you would go, wow, like you look more like her than you look like your father. That's not necessarily true, but from certain angles, I can see that. If you were to see a picture of my grandmother, because of what people did to my family when they were in chattel slavery, if you look at a picture of my grandmother or my maternal grandmother, you would discover that she and the Queen of England, when they were both young, they look exactly the same. So my goal here is not to say that all what you consider once again to be white people, right, or even people that don't have as much melanin, is my goal is not to say that all skin folk is kinfolk. In other words, I do not believe that just because you look like me, that you are righteous, and because you do not look at me, you are evil. That is foolishness. Now, if you come on here ready to fight against that, that's because you're bringing somebody else's foolishness with you. You're bringing somebody else's fight. But it's not going to be a fair fight for you because it's not that I'm not going to fight fair. I'm not going to fight you. Okay? That's not my fight, to try and say that because somebody has hair like mine, they're better than you. That's foolish. I've had people, mess me over who look just like me. I've had people who have my blood in their veins mess me over. This is not the conversation for that. How you doing, Devin or Devon? Not sure how you pronounce it. Devon. Thanks for being part of the community. So you hear what I'm saying? You hear what I'm saying? You're so quick because you lack nuance. Just because I said, first of all, to say the Romans weren't white is not an egregious thing to say. Like, these are pictures of Romans, right? Study what Justinian looked like. Study what Septimius Severus. I don't even know what Marcus Aurelius looked like, in all honesty. Study Septimius Severus. Have you ever studied Septimius Severus? and study his two sons who also were over the Roman Empire, even though they were over the Roman Empire for a short amount of time. Septimius Severus, who, by the way, is the one that went into Britain because the people of Britain asked him specifically, "Hey, people are wilding out over here. We're having problems, and we're having people attack us." So he went over there and created much of the infrastructure that you guys still walk on. Certain places with cobblestone and stuff like that. It's stuff that he put in place, right? But you have a problem because you don't want to be nuanced, right? Julius Caesar is described as somebody who had color. By the way, even Alexander the Great. I know what you see in the marble where the paint has come off, right? But if you look at Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedonia, it tells you that Philip of Macedonia was dark skinned. But once again, you think that every Greek, and see, here's the deal. Even us as a people can't believe that we could be Greek and Roman because Greeks and Romans did some pretty terrible stuff, just like Etruscans did, by the way. As much as we like to talk about Etruscans because we try to say Romans just took the stuff from the Etruscans and killed them off. Well, yeah, they took certain things from their culture, and not everything in the Etruscan culture is cool. They were very sexual explicit and very abusive in a sexual manner towards their women. But you want to identify with that because you are okay with saying Romans took from them. Why? Because you want to say, well, the white Romans killed those black people. But that's not how that worked. Not all skin folk is kin folk. And just because you both have a similar skin color doesn't mean you come from the same tribe. Oh, that's the best you got, Kevin? Okay, you got to do a little better than that when you're trolling. If that's your way of saying hello, though, how you doing? Have a great day, right? But you got to realize, see, now that part of the discussion, that's racism. Right? That part of the discussion there. Thank you, moderators, for that. I bow down to the moderators. Appreciate y'all, right? But see, you got to be in a position where you're ready to have nuanced conversation. Right? Nuance. See, that person that was even there using hate and doing those things or whatever and coming on here and making those remarks, which is crazy, by the way. Be careful about the remarks that you make because now it's actually on the web. If somebody wanted to, I'm not going to, but just for future reference, if somebody wanted to, they could report you. At least be careful about it. At least do it in my DMs. Right? So you hear what I'm saying? You have to be in a position to where you have to discover and look, do enough travel, go enough places in the world, and you'll discover that this thing is deeper than that, deeper than what you think. Like I was talking about earlier, Caucasians deal with a lot of racism in Russia. By the way, Caucasians were some of the people that got it the worst when it came to eugenics because Caucasians became a big deal, and eventually other people wanted to call themselves Caucasians because of this. But Caucasians became a big deal because they were made slaves, but at the same time, people who studied their bone structure when they were dead started saying they had the most beautiful bone structure out of anybody because this person had some very necrophiliac type sexual lust for the Caucasian people. So from that point on, they became fetishized. And then that which became fetishized, people eventually wanted to become. So now you have a bunch of people that call themselves Caucasian, a bunch of people that call people Caucasians. And that's actually very like a terrible thing to do, to call them, not because they were enslaved per se, but because, they're not Caucasian. But we just throw stuff out there. You said I'm the original samurai. I am not related to anybody, but who's a samurai. No, I have been over to Japan enough to know that there are certain places that you get and go into that they talk to you about certain things because certain samurai had to have the one drop rule. If you know about certain samurai that are famous over there for being African, so there are certain things that they really are excited when you go over there. They want you to see if you know the right people, but no, and I'm definitely not the last samurai because isn't that what's his name? Isn't that um, guy from Top Gun? Isn't he supposed to be the last samurai? The race of saying race. No, what does the word race mean, CK? Real quick, what does the word race mean? Tom Cruise. That's right. Isn't Tom Cruise the last samurai? Just like the last of the Mohicans was not Mohican. or Tom Cruise, whatever his name is. He's the last samurai. I know that. Whichever one, you know who I'm talking about. A race is a competition. So you have to ask yourself why you still think it's a skin color. Because that's not something I did. Do you know about Carl Linnaeus? No. Race is not color or culture. Race is a competition. If you were to talk to a 2-year-old and say, we're going to have a race, they would not one time think. Or if you were to say to them, hey, let's talk about race, they would not one time think to you, what color is somebody, what tribe did they come from? Right? That's a modern thing that people are using because we're having non-nuanced conversation or conversation that skips over certain nuances. Right? Carl Linnaeus is the one who started, because remember, this is where the term race having to do with competition between living beings came into place, right? Or, well, not living beings. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. Race starts with people that started saying animals had races because animals were in competition. Carl Linnaeus then comes behind that and takes that and starts saying, okay, animals have races, they have competition, so there's animal races. Then he starts saying that, hey, maybe human beings came from animal races, right? So and then he named them, he put them in Latin terms, of course, because they must be scientific. So he put them in Latin, as if Latin is a white language, right? But nevertheless, he puts it in Latin and he says white people up top, red people next, yellow people next, and then black people at the bottom. And then out of that comes a book, which, by the way, I will just show them. I'll just show you the book because people think that I'm just running off at the mouth, but you don't realize that you've been tricked because people won't tell you the actual reality of that which I'm saying. They will tell you how wrong I am. They are so upset. You're in your feelings, you're in your emotions, and you'll be the first person to tell me, facts over feelings, even though I believe that all feelings are factual, right? Because if you feel a certain way, you feel a certain way. But nevertheless, I'll go ahead and roll with what y'all do. How about this? We'll just look at the title of the book, right? What's the title of the book? Written by Charles Darwin, who did it based off of what Carl Linnaeus said, right? Charles Darwin, who did it based off of what Carl Linnaeus said, because it's Linnaean in doctrine. That means Carl Linnaeus, okay? You ready? No, race is a competition. You got to read about it. Carl Linnaeus is the first person to start telling me about races. And then it went to a further thing, right? To where if you read this book, you'll discover that instead of it being called species, they talk about races. And when they start talking about human species that come from other animal species, they start telling you which ones are there. Now, why is this book written? Because Charles Darwin wrote it so that you would know the origin of species by means of natural selection. So what are we selecting naturally? What does nature select for itself? Or the preservation of favorite races in the struggle for life, written in 1859, which I know you think is so long ago, but there's some people today that actually have a grandparent that was alive or that was alive in 1859. They have to have children really far apart and have it with really young women, but it's happened enough times. So it's not as far as you might think it is. But that's what that book was written. The Origin of Speech, that's why it was written, to continue what Carl Linnaeus wrote. The Origin of Species by means of, but you don't know the title. And that's not even the whole title either. I just want to share that with you because people think you're making this stuff up. But you've never read it. Many of you heard the term evolution in school and thought that evolution was just something random or something that somebody came by going to school. Charles Darwin, by the way, never got a degree in science. Charles Darwin's degree was in preaching. Because back then you didn't have to actually go to classes. You got your bachelor's degree simply for being a bachelor. Your family could afford to put you in school. And if they could afford to put you in school long enough, then eventually you paid for a degree. He got his degree in preaching, but you keep listening to him as far as evolution. But then you tell me that something's wrong with me. I'm just trying to tell you there's some things you might not know. There's nuance. Amen. Haven't been led as we believe. You said he ended up dying a Christian and did not believe in that? Okay. I'm just telling you what his background was. When he went to school, he might have looked through some microscopes from time to time, but he never learned science. Wrote a whole book about it, though. And so the people who are such trained scientists are having faith in somebody whose faith, when he was writing about it, was something that he was hoping that he could change the belief structure to be something to where we had more faith in a system of races rather than we had in a system that was for each other. I didn't write the book. I didn't write Manifest Destiny or create Manifest Destiny that people who were like Rudyard Kipling, who wrote the Jungle Book, would come right after that and say, hey, America, we see y'all doing big things that you spread across the country. Make sure that you keep doing it, doing what you're doing. Manifest Destiny is the cry. This is why we must go ahead and do it. Same kind of line of thinking that came from the white man's burden. Now, once again, somebody had to teach you that you were white and teach you that because you were white, you were better, and teach other people that they weren't as great to carry out what? Competition, races, natural selection, that you would continue to do that. While meanwhile, the people that really you should be against, instead of questioning facts or context or contextual facts, you should question why these people put this stuff in place in the first place. Because if you believe in humanity, then you are my brother. Right? And by the way, even if you're talking about evolution, you know there's 6 types of evolution. No, I'm not Roman at all. Right? Catch what I'm saying. Right? If you just coming in, we record these for a reason. If you'd like to go back and actually find out what's going on, right? Catch what I'm saying. Just because you are the same color as somebody doesn't mean that that's you. There's 6 types of evolution. And you got to figure out which one of them has the evidence that you think it does. A lot of people talk about evolution, don't even realize which one of the 6 are you talking about? Because they don't all go together. Just like when somebody says, I believe in Buddhism. Well, I believe in Christianity. Well, I believe in being a Muslim. Well, I believe in being a Hindu. Well, I believe in this, that. Okay, fine. You keep doing all this stuff, and then you say, I'm going to combine all of it together, but they don't even agree with each other. You said Romans were white? Okay, once again, if you'd like to go ahead and make up the term white, to go ahead and do so. Nobody even considered the term white until Rome wasn't even the empire anymore. Now, the Roman Catholic Church is responsible, who was a continuation of the Western Roman Empire. The Pope for the Crusades is what starts you to start thinking about white and blue eyes and all that stuff on that regard. The blue eyes technically actually come from the Greeks, and the blonde hair actually comes from the Greeks, where they said that melanated people who had that, they were actually the people who deserved to be kings over Rome. Over Greece. So that's more so that. But once again, it's nuanced. You're trying to have a conversation and you don't want to bring up details. You said, why would I think? Well, first of all, olive skin is not what we're talking about with white. Number 1, right? Number 2, what does Roman mean? Now, are we saying Roman as far as the actual people of Rome? So we're not talking about the empire. Cool. Let's focus on the people of Rome. Where were they from initially? And what makes you think, what details do you have written down? Because we have people that describe what they look like, right? They don't have locks or anything, but we have people who tell you what they look like. Once again, let's go back to the Greeks even, because let's go back before we start looking at the Romans as they're building up and as they're coming out of being the wolf. Not what I'm saying, what they say, what Romans say that they came out of, right? Born of a wolf, Romulus, Remus, all that stuff, right? Let's look at the Greeks. Philip of Macedonia, the father of Alexander the Great. How was he described as looking? What about the Spartans? King Leonidas, forget 300. King Leonidas, what is he actually written as looking? Don't talk about the wigs. What are they looking at? What are they said to look like? What is Septimius Severus said to look like? You said I got my facts wrong about Charles Darwin. Okay, so that's not the name of his book. That's not the name of Carl Linnaeus. Didn't do that as far as race. His book doesn't describe anything as far as races being and species being used interchangeably. And it doesn't have a whole page in which he lists different races from top to bottom, which one is best and which one is worse. If you're saying I'm lying about all that, I've got everything wrong about it, and I misread, hey, we'll just have to agree to disagree. But once again, see, everybody's here to tell me how wrong I am. Answer the question for me, please. How is Philip of Macedonia, the father of Alexander the Great, described to look? You said they weren't black either? Okay, fine. If that's where you want to go. I've already said this earlier. Melanin comes in different shades. I've already told you a white person doesn't exist even by law, but just in general, because white, before somebody started getting you to think it was a color, white actually means the absence of color. It means to be clear. It means to be bright. It means to be reflective. And if you have any pink in you, if you have any blood in you, if you have anything that has a hue in you, you cannot be defined as white, and you cannot live without melanin. Everybody has melanin. Now, you want to argue if it's melanin that has sulfur in the center or it's melanin that has something else in the center, whatever. fine. But you have melanin if you're alive, just like every plant must have chlorophyll. The thing that makes the plants live, whether they're white or not, the thing that makes plants live is that they have chlorophyll. The thing that makes you live is that you have melanin. Without melanin, none of us are alive. None of us are alive. None of us are alive. So that's my point. You're arguing over something about this and that. I'm trying to tell you, you can't be white by definition. And by the way, I get when you say you can't be black because you're trying to say your hair is black, is closer to black than your skin. I get what you're saying. And my tribe is not named black. Now, I don't mind being called black. I say this all the time. But on paper, even in the West, I will never call myself black because by definition in Western law, right, especially American law, Canadian law, and other laws here, European laws as well, right? But in Western law that permeates a lot of places in society, if you label yourself as black, colored, Negro, or African American, you are considered to be a fake person because there's no status for that. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, right? But we're not going to act like these social constructs are not real and they're not used. But once again, it's nuance, and people don't like to go to nuance. You want to go from one extreme to the other. If you would stop going to extremes, you might be able to hear in the nuance. I'm not trying to give a hurricane and knock your house down and say that you ain't nothing. I'm trying to knock on your door gently and say, hey, would you like to know something that brings us closer together? That's what I'm saying. Right? If you really believe in humanity the way that you say, then why not listen? Well, we depends on the moderators, right? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. You're fine, Crystal. Sorry. Yeah, like, and by the way, I'm okay with you being triggered. That's why I'm not running down your throat. That's why I'm not yelling at you. I know this triggers you because you were taught that white's a real thing. You were taught that the reason you should have reparations is because black people deserve reparations or African Americans. The people that deserve reparations are the descendants of freedmen. Because the people who got reparations, they were freedmen. So if you would like to get reparations as what was promised to you, then you should get it as a freedman. Or you need to figure out how to make Negro considered to be a people. Because if you're not a people or a nation, then you can't get reparations. This is why slave masters, like, look, it's not the only reason, but this is why slave masters got reparations and the slaves didn't. Slaves are not considered to be people. If they're not, right? So Lincoln gave reparations to slave masters before, and by the way, it wasn't Lincoln that gave reparations to his own people because he didn't like us. It was somebody who hated us but was trying to destroy the Confederacy, General Sherman. He's the one that talked to 4 black pastors. This for educational purposes only, thank you. He talked to 4 black pastors and had a conversation with them. And he liked the fact that the pastors were saying that we want to make sure that we live on our own and take care of our own and teach our own. Right? That's how that happened. So once again, they didn't consider themselves to be black either. They might have when they came over, depending on where they were, depending on if they were blue black or if they were Kimmy. Chemistry comes from the word chemistry, the study of Kemet, where they believe the people came from the black sands. I'm not saying every Roman person can be identified as what you call black. By the way, not everybody up here, when they say Romans were not white, let's be honest, not everybody up here was Roman by actual Roman tribe. But if you're talking about through the empire, well, then yeah. And by the way, it started to not matter as much because if you had the armies behind you, who cared what color you were? See, that's something you don't want to talk about either, because then we have to talk about today. Who has the armies behind them? Who has the system in place? You said they were not black as in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, we get that. You if you're just coming in, Reverend Tommy, we've already talked about that. So come in assuming that I agree with you on that, okay? I don't get it. Like, listen long enough What do you mean they weren't what? They're olive colored and this and that or whatever. First of all, like when you say people are olive colored, like what color olive? You know, there's many different colors of olive. Number one, but you mean something specific to what you want it to, because you want to talk about people who are Ashkenazi, who they themselves technically aren't even olive colored, but you would still try to call them white. But then you say white or olive colored. No, which one are you? Yeah, that's right, because there's no such color as white. White is the absence of color. It's bright. This is by law. Look up in the law. Look up what a white person is. You come back and tell me. What is my ethnicity? My tribe, and who I am and what I identify with as far as on paper in the West. I'm a non-citizen national, which means I'm allowed to be Tisalagi. I'm allowed to be Anakituaya. I'm allowed to be which one you want. I mean, you want to say Kemet, you want to say Kush. This stuff I'm actually legit am. You want to say Yasrael, you want to say Shwit, you want to say Ashanti, a little bit of Igbo. Which part of the world that I come? You want to say Jamaican? Not as far as what they call the country Jamaica, but actually the lineage of Jamaicans that go from the upper North America all the way down the East Coast at one point before they got killed off, all the way down to what you call Jamaica today. You want to talk about Omek Sheep? Or you just want to talk about the fact that I adhere to certain cultural things that are within my culture and my family that we uphold? And by the way, once again, I just said this: if you believe in the humanity of others, then you are my brother, you are my sister. So if your whole thing is to try and figure out how I'm not brother or sister, you missed it. You're saying that they're saying that everyone was Black Egyptians and now Roman Egyptians. Well, first of all, not everybody was, first of all, to be Egyptian. See, this is why, once again, nuance. An Egyptian is not an African. Not by the whole Middle East thing that y'all do now, that you've been taught, that Egypt is in the Middle East. No, no, no. An Egyptian is not an African, because Egyptian people were Greeks. Egypticos, hieroglyphics, things like that. Those are not Kemetic words. The people of Kemet and the people of Cush are the people who are African. Those dynasties were the first dynasties, right? The Cushitic dynasties first, right? Ethiopia, Sudan, others, they were the first dynasty over everything. And then they split when the Kemetic people wanted to take over Kemet, which, if you look at the history of where they come from, that's basically Kemet's little brother, just like, or Cush's little brother. Kemet is Cush's little brother. Kemet is like America. Cush is like England. So basically, Cush came first, had a vast empire. Kemet basically came next. And then actually, when Kemet started to lose to others coming in, right, like Arabians and eventually the Greeks, it was the Cush that came in and tried to take over again and actually tried to fight off those who were trying to take over Kemet, and they couldn't do it. It was a big, huge deal for Cush because Cush barely lost. Cush was still beating people with what y'all would call primitive weapons. They were still beating them in World War II. When people were trying to come in there, when Mussolini brought the Italians in, the Cush were beating the brakes off them still in World War II. King Metternich, right? But the Cushitic Empire came first. Then it was Kemetic dynasties, many different dynasties, 20 plus dynasties that were in Cush and Kemet over hundreds of years. And then once they lost to the Greeks. Those are the Egyptians. Alexander the Great comes in, and eventually when his kingdom is split into four kingdoms, right? Daniel chapter 7, the four-headed leopard, right? His kingdom is split into four ways, right? Four generals take his kingdom. And then what happens? Ptolemy goes and steals his body, brings it back to Kemet, and says now Egypt belongs to the Ptolemaic dynasty. And the Ptolemaic dynasty had, 20 something people on the throne too. Cleopatra is the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty. So even though she was dark skinned, she was not African. So she was dark skinned, but she was not African. Shoot, if I read on the fourth grade level, I would be proud to read on the fourth grade level because your school system is trash. Thomas Jefferson made it to make slaves out of people, to make poor whites not get much, and then the Rockefellers came after that and basically designed your school system to make slaves out of everybody. So, hey, if you feel like my reading skills and my verbal skills are things that do not meet the criteria to make sure that you feel like my oratory skills are something that is immaculate and something that makes you reach to the heavens to be able to say that everything that he speaks is that of such great diction and power and something that I can bow down to, because it is not, because it manipulates the same way that the ladies and gentlemen of times of old have been able to suggest by every single verbiage that comes out of their mouth to be able to decipher, to help me to decipher things through such a Eurocentric lens that it must be considered to be greatness and never follow. If you consider that to be something that's on the fourth grade level, then so be it. But I prefer to be here, because even like this thing above me says that Romans, we're not white. I'm also here to tell you that the people who taught me are not white. So they're not my standard. Now, I don't hate white people and I don't hate their teachings. I just don't need them. You can teach your children and I'll teach mine. As long as you teach them the truth, as long as I teach them the truth, we should meet up at the same place. Unless you think that the only reason my people cannot reach the same place is because you feel like we're just dumb, stupid, or slow. But color has nothing to do with status. It shouldn't, but it does. And color should have nothing to do with education. It shouldn't, but it does. You got to ask yourself why that happened. And you got to ask yourself if I did that or somebody else did. Much love to you, though, and hoping that someday you look for truth rather than trolls. You find more comfort in ad hominem. That's a fourth grade word as well, right? But see, you have to make sure that you're not on that level to be worried about those things. Uh-oh. How you doing, Leon? Already got yourself in trouble with the moderators. I'm not a hotep, and I didn't say that I'm a Roman. You came in on the wrong part of the conversation. As a matter of fact, if you had just been here a little earlier, if you actually wanted to ask a question, you're muted, so you can't respond right now. But before the moderators had to get to you, we started off talking about Tartarian and talking about how we can't just make the assumption that just because somebody might have been black in the area, that means that we should go ahead and attach ourselves to their culture and say that they're us, because that would be misappropriation of culture. Just like you're doing misappropriation of words. You see what I'm saying? And ultimately, what we started off with trying to talk about today is nuance. People don't want to get into nuance conversation. You came on here, you saw somebody who wears his hair a certain way. You saw somebody who wears his clothes within his culture, by the way. It's not just me saying I'm hotep or this and that. I come from this, right? This is something my people make for me. This is something my people have blessed me with and sent to me. Put in my hand and said, hey, this is yours. Be the same people who allowed me to be angelically out. You know what that is, right? So you see what I'm saying? We're having people that aren't nuanced or don't even, like, think about this. If you will not even ask the question, think about it. If you won't even ask the question, what is your culture? What is your tribe? You have to tell yourself, you got to see, you're not having a nuanced conversation. I'm sorry, Aslan, what'd you say earlier? You said your grandma came to England from Montserrat, excited to see white people. Your granddad had to explain that she was looking at them. She obviously knew what the color white really meant. Boom. Thank you, Aslan. Aslan, who joins us from England himself. So this is not something I'm just talking about here, right? So Aslan is telling you that his grandmother, who came from Montserrat, right? The Isle of Montserrat. If you know about the Isle of Montserrat, that's where Africans or African slaves, native slaves, and Irish slaves were all put on an island together, and they mix together, and so they share cultures. You'll see somebody that to you looks like a light-skinned black person. They'll be sitting there singing an Irish hymn, right? They eat meals that are mixed with, they'll have a Celtic meal, they have an African meal, sometimes they have stuff that's mixed together, right? And so, I said he, okay, my bad, I'm sorry. I did say he. Sorry about that. I apologize. Sorry about that. If I've been saying he, then I really apologize. I actually should remember from certain things you said before in the past, but I apologize. Won't do it again. Um, sorry. But yeah, so she was saying that her grandmother came from the Isle of Montserrat. And if you know about that, that means that she came from people that were a melting pot of many different cultures and many different colors, even because there are darker skinned people on the Isle of Montserrat. There were lighter skinned people that, on the Isle of Montserrat. She came to America or to England, and she was super excited because she was getting ready to go and see white people. She had never seen a white person before. That's what she's saying about her grandma, right? Her grandmother, right? Her grandmother went to England and she was excited because she was going to see white people. And somebody had to explain to her grandmother, you know that you're looking at white people, right? That's what they had to explain to her grandmother. You know you're looking at white people, right? So what were they saying? What were they doing there? They would have to tell her that, hey, you think that you're looking for somebody who has no color, because that's what the color white used to mean. And they had to explain to her, no, 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 like this is what they say white people are. They say white people actually are like these pinkish colored people, these brownish people. These are white people. Because she came from a place to where she hadn't had, even though she was in the place she was in because of colonialism, which attacked her even as having her Irish blood. She also was going to a place to where, or she was coming from a place to where they weren't her teachers on certain things, including race, right? So it was difficult for her, right, to be able to say that. Thank you, Austin, for that example. Yes, there were Romans with red hair. There were Romans that looked like what you call white people. There were Romans that were dark skinned. There were Romans that this and that. There were Romans that were mixed. There were Romans that took other people's wives and therefore had children, stuff like that. Look that up over and over again. Matter of fact, look up what happened to start the Carthaginian War, or I'm sorry, the Punic Wars, what we call the Punic or the Punic or the Phoenician Wars, right? Look at all those different things, right? I'm trying to get you to comprehend that white is not a color, that you can't exist and have no melanin. Even if you're albino, you must have melanin. There's no such person that has white blood. You hear what I'm saying? I'm not saying that you said that I'm wrong. Okay, well, we'll have to agree to disagree then, right? Give me the dictionary. Well, actually, I already know which dictionaries you probably would use. But if you look in the dictionary, matter of fact, if you look in law, white has no status. They tricked you into believing that there has to be white people. Now, look up what the Roman Catholic Church told you to get you to start fighting and starting to die to get them 40 virgins, right, during the Crusades. And then eventually what started happening to make them less color, the more pure something is. And then the pictures they did, and then changing Yehoshua to go from what he looked like as an Israelite to all of a sudden, making him look like Cesare Borgia. Then we might be able to have a conversation. You said there's a guy on here that preaches that Caucasian people are not melanated. If they have zero melanin, if somebody has zero melanin, they dead, or they never existed. Yeah, Charles Darwin and Carl Linnaeus. Like, look, read. Like, people think I'm making this stuff up. Matter of fact, I want you to do some research. Look up somebody called Dr. Joy DeGruy, right? Look her up. Joy, last name Degruy. I'm probably mispronouncing her last name. Go look up. She has a book called PTSS, Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which she talks about how white and black people both had to be tricked and still are dealing with things coming from what we used to be, right? And are coming from things that we're no longer supposed to be, right? But look her up and how we're still carrying stuff and fighting about stuff that doesn't even matter anymore, right? It should have never mattered, and that the only thing we need now is the healing. We need to actually go through a process to where we can actually get some kind of counseling, get some kind of coaching, get somebody to look at us, and we can actually express some of the stuff and realize how folly some of these things are that have been there, right? But go look her up and go look up a speech that she did, and look up Dr. Joy DeGruy, Carl Linnaeus. Look up Dr. Joy DeGruy, Charles Darwin. Look up Charles, right? Look up, matter of fact, Carl Linnaeus is your safest bet. Look up Dr. Joy DeGruy, Carl Linnaeus, and see what pops up. And listen. She'll give you the smoking gun that you say that I'm not giving you. She'll give you the stuff that many of you, because you're into Western logic, you only think if it's written down then it matters. or who writes it down means if you respect who wrote it down or you respect who speak it. Go to somebody who has way more degrees and more knowledge in this than you or I. I've never said that because I'm saying everybody in Rome, that Romans were not white. Like, I'm not saying that they can't be European. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying they didn't come from Italy, but you have zero nuance. That's why what we're talking about today is nuance is required. It's necessary. You guys can't have conversation about anything because it's either got to be all your way or nothing. And you are having you're acting like people who have triggered behavior if you're not careful. If the shoe fits wear it, if it doesn't, take it off. If this is something that's for you, you could scroll. Or if there's something that you never heard, listen. And if it's something that you learn, but it's not necessarily something that applies to you, then learn about it. And maybe you can have it in your reference point to where if it does apply to somebody else, help them out. But nuance is required. If all it takes for me to shake you up and to start talking about Tartarians and other things is to put this up here, and now y'all start losing your mind. And by the way, a lot of you probably never even heard of what a Tartarian is before tonight. I just found out that there's a lot of people on here who are online nowadays who are starting to try and figure out Tartarians, and they're selling stuff. And one of my first things to do on there was to tell you that yes, some of them that were originally there are darker skinned people. It does not mean that they are you. And it doesn't mean that they're titans. It doesn't mean that you are the gods of everybody else. It doesn't mean that. It's never meant that. Just like the reverse doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that because you have lighter skin, you're better than anybody else. And as I said before, I got to say it again because everybody's in such fighting on this stuff. And it's tiresome. Not because I can't take it. It's tiresome because it really makes me realize like you guys can't have a proper conversation because you can't do nuance. It is not my goal to put anybody on here down. Once again, it's by Dr. Joy DeGroy called PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome. She wanted to call it PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder, right? But she decided to call it PTSS because she knew a lot of people would be so turned off they couldn't read it. So post-traumatic slave syndrome. You said come to Naples? I was never stationed there, but I definitely went to Naval Base. You think I've never been? That's your assumption. This first place I had actual pizza before, by the way. Very, very great. I like pizza like that. Don't get any of it in the States for real, for real. Even in Italian restaurants, they don't make it like that. But I've been wine country, all that. I've been. Your assumption is that I haven't, and your assumption is that because once again I tell you that Romans were not white, that and you think that means that white must mean pure of skin or the whitest of this or white according to colonial constructs. That's not my definition. Paul, though, I'm not even going to dignify that. Stay on long enough if you want to actually know what I mean. If not, thank you for being on and just keep scrolling. You said where geographically did the Tartarians originate from? Tartarian used to just be an overall thing that was used by European people to describe people that were in basically Central Asia. So could some of the Tartarians have made their way up to Russia? Sure. But that was something that they used. Now, can we say that some of the people that look like Tartarians were up in Russia? For sure. But it doesn't mean that's where they originated. And by the way, Tartarian was never a group of people. Yes, Dr. Joy DeGroy. Tartarians were never a group of people, by the way. That was something that somebody else who was in power called them that, right? Like, for example, why do you see when you guys come in here talking about, oh, Yashua, or who you call Jesus, he was Middle Eastern. Why do you even call people Middle Eastern? Do you know why you even call people Middle Eastern? Do you know where that term came from? Do you know where the term came from, Middle Eastern? Do you actually know where that came from? You use it, but you don't even know where it comes from because you're not in the etymology. So you hear somebody start talking about Middle East or talk a certain place, and you just use a blanket term called Middle East. Middle East does not mean what you think it would. Middle East is not even a territory. Kind of, sort of, in the minds of certain Englishmen, but it's not a territory. Okay, go ahead. User 1, 2, 3, 4. We've already had this conversation. If you want to actually listen to find out what the definition of white that we're using is, rather than what people have decided to start identifying as today, then you're more than welcome to find out. But this is why we keep talking about nuance is necessary. People don't even want to look. People not like. Do you notice all these people saying Romans were white, Romans were white, Romans were white, Romans were white, Romans were white? Not one person that says, "What do you define as white?" Nuance, right? You said bring up the bus. Well, even the bus of those people that are there, right? It loses its color, the color that they use. That's why a lot of stuff, even a lot of stuff that you just call marble, a lot of stuff that's marble used to have paint on it. You know that, right? So over time, the paint went away, especially depending on where it was. So a lot of the paint has actually gone away because they weren't using the same things that were painted by other people whose paint existed. Okay, tell me I'm wrong all day, whatever. I didn't say every single thing of Marvel, but I know enough, and I listen to people that actually are in these places, in these museums. Natural, I've talked to the people that work at Smithsonian. Right. I used to be there every day. I've been to the castle. I've been to the people that are behind the scenes. I've been to the place where it's down underneath where the metro station is. You don't even know that there's the underneath place. That's where they keep all the stuff over there. Right. I've been there to where you can see the ancient writings and see the writings that were actually in enveloped, but were actually over in North America, things like that. Right. I've been to the places that led me to going and seeing the pyramids and stuff that have Latin and Greek written on them by Romans that were actually coming over here. Not only were Africans visiting over here in the States to, the pyramid that's in Illinois and writing on the inside of that, but also Romans were doing so as well. Right. So do some travel, do some stuff. And I don't have to go by just what somebody else wants you to do as far as initiative. I'm telling you, somebody who's been there. But once again, what you're calling the Middle East, the only reason why it's called the Middle East, and people don't want to get into it, people don't want to be honest about it. The only reason why you call it the Middle East is because it's in the middle of what you of England called East. What do I mean by that? If you were far east, that meant you were all the way on the Pacific Ocean. If you were east, you were close. So what's in the middle? The Middle East. That's the only reason why you call it Middle East. And it has nothing to do with Middle Eastern people or region or this and that. England, right? Remember, England used to boast that their empire was so vast, or really the British Empire was so vast that there was not a time during the day that the sun did not shine upon the British Empire, meaning that there was not one time during the day that somebody on the planet was not being lit up because England had control over everything. So when it comes to what you call Asia and Europe, they would say that if it was far east, it was far. If it was close east, it was east. If it was in the middle, it was called Middle East. That's the only reason why you use those terms. And some of you are fighting hard to keep that as if that's a real thing. By the way, how many? Let's do it like this. Let's do it like this because some people. This is how messed up it is. This is how messed up it is. People can't comprehend. People don't want to actually have conversation. This is how messed up it is. We don't want to do any nuance. Tell me, how many continents are there? Because this is what you're going off of some messed up thinking. How many continents are there? May I ask? This seems like a simple answer, right? So you should get it correct. 7, right? But what if I were to tell you that that's not correct? Some of y'all already know the answer. But what if I were to tell you that is incorrect? That is something that's based off of a modern manipulation of what the definition of a continent is. Now, people would say, oh, you're just making stuff up. Au contraire. Mon chéri. Allow me to be able to tell you what a continent is by definition. A continent is a large landmass completely surrounded by water. Maybe you didn't know that. Well, because this is just one picture that we have, did forget to say sorry. So maybe you should just pay attention. This is just one slide that I have up today that I've used. What we're talking about today is we need nuance. So listen with nuance as well. You might be able to catch it. All right, you ready? All right. So now that you got that, maybe you'll listen long enough because once again, you're so stuck on stuff you're not willing to actually have nuanced conversation. Because the ultimate goal of this is to get you to see that what people are teaching you is not correct, and for you to be arguing over something rather than listen to something is causing you to not be able to learn or at least see if somebody has something to offer that might make you at least think. Nevertheless, right? I appreciate your presence, but I'm just saying we're not going to get much if it's just going to be we're going to come on here and say you're terrible, I don't like you, et cetera, right? So just like we talked about with the Middle East and how jacked up that is, the only reason you think there's 7 continents is because you don't know the definition of a continent. A continent is defined as a large landmass completely surrounded by water. If a continent is a large landmass completely surrounded by water, there cannot be 7. There cannot be 7. You want to know why? Because North America and South America are connected. That'd be 1 continent. Australia is disconnected. That would be 1 continent. 2, right? Antarctica, I always mess it up. Antarctica would be completely separated. That would be 1 continent. 3. And now we get to Africa, Asia, and Europe. Africa, Asia, and Europe. Are any of them disconnected? See, people don't like it when you bring something in there because you're putting chinks in the armor. Are Africa, Europe, or Asia disconnected from each other? The answer would be no. So technically, there's only 4 continents, and you didn't even think of Europe as being a continent because Europe used to just be part of Asia, or even considered to be Africa, depending on whose viewpoint you were looking at. Or people didn't even consider it to be anything because nobody was really going over there. And they didn't consider anything to be because they weren't going over the other side. But then once certain people got in control, and remember, Europe literally means anything. See, this is what it has to do with it for the person who was trying so hard to be against it. Europe means anything that belongs to Rome. Europa, that's what it initially meant. So if Rome conquered an African province, it was what? It was Europa. It was European. And then eventually, Eastern Rome and Western Rome both go down. Western Rome first, but the Pope still exists. But you had other people like the Germans, right? Charlemagne. And then eventually, the French and France and Normandy and the Portuguese and the Spanish and Russians and Prussians and British people. And eventually they fought and fought and fought. And all of them were trying to say that they had claim to this European power, this romantic power, this Greco-Roman power. And eventually it would get to be the English who kept up the British Empire, which is what the Romans called them because they called them brutes, brutish. Therefore, you became British. And they ruled saying that they had this fake lineage back to Rome, even though they were enslaved themselves. But since like a lot of us do, they had chattel because of a version of slavery, not necessarily chattel slavery, but because of things that were done to them, they were wiped out and genocide was done to all these people and different things like that, and mixture of Germanic language and French language and even Moorish language, African languages, things like that, all these things mixed in, where now you don't speak Anglo because those people half of them were killed off initially just when William the Conqueror came in there. Before that, he was known as William the Bastard. Some of you don't even know where I'm going because there's so many nuances that nobody taught you. But then after all those things that you finally got to a place of doing that, but during the time it went from that to, okay, fine, we want to be Europa, something that belongs to Rome. We want to say that we have the benefit. We come from that. We are allowed to be kings. Because remember, all the kings and queens of Europe are married into each other. If you don't believe it, the easiest way to do the research on that is look up a black queen who was married to a white king. What we call them, the black queen is oh, wow. Sorry, y'all. White king is King George, black queen. So the white king is King George. The black queen is, I'm trying to say Cleopatra from our conversation earlier. That is definitely not right. Because we think that what's her face? Meghan Markle is the first person of color to marry into the royal family. Queen Charlotte, thank you. Queen Charlotte, the black queen, and King George, the white king, and they came together and they had children. She had 13 children, 11 of which survived, and all 11 of them were married into European families. There is not one European group of royalty that does not have her bloodline in it, therefore King George's bloodline in it. Said Cleopatra was brown. Cleopatra was Greek. So yes, we said that earlier. We already brought her up. Cleopatra is somebody that would have been somebody of dark hue, but it doesn't mean that she was African. She was not Kemetic, right? She was Ptolemaic. She came from the Ptolemaic dynasty, which is part of the Greek dynasty that fought with Alexander. Alexander himself was from Philip of Macedonia. Philip of Macedonia, he was somebody of skin color. So even if you want to say he was mixed, he still had color, right? So no problem with it, right? And by the way, I'm not saying this to say that these people are better, because Alexander the Great is not my standard. He did terrible things to many different people in the name of conquest. Cleopatra is not my standard at all. If she's yours, that's fine. She's not my standard. We don't lift her up in our house. She did many different things to many different people, right? That's why her and Caesar were like this. And she was willing to do anything she could to try and make sure one of her children got on the throne, right? So that's not my standard. I'm not saying, well, once again, when I have this conversation, I don't believe that all skin folk are kinfolk. I don't believe that all Israel is Israel. I don't believe that every white person is evil, right? And the opposite of all those is I don't believe in those either. There's nuance. There's nuance. There's nuance. I have no Alexander the Great. I wouldn't think that Alexander the Great would be defeated by Haiti if Alexander the Great died. In actually he didn't die in Africa, right? He died back in Asia, or was it in India? I think it's Asia. His body was brought back to Kemet, which they called Egypt at that point. No, Alexander's sister was not Cleopatra. Alexander would have died 20 something generations before Cleopatra, or at least 15. You said there's a difference between the Egyptians and the Israelites. Well, Egyptians, once again, are different. Kemetic people, if you're talking about pure, but once again, even pure blood gets into this weird thing, assuming that people didn't marry outside of their race or their tribe or whatever. But if you're talking about E1B1B blood versus E1B1A, then yeah, we can have that conversation, right? But also, too, was not Joseph the 11th tribe? Is he not married into Kemet? And did not Kemetic people come into the wilderness and procreate over 40 years? So, and does not even the Bible just say that even those of Kemet can be considered the sons of Elohim? So nuance is everything. People are arguing because they don't want to go in between the nook and crannies. It's not as simple as all white or all black. It's not as simple as you look like. It's not as simple as if you're in America, you must be an Israelite. It's not as simple as that. And at some point, we got to even get to the point of who's grafted in, who's adopted into this. And by the way, that even goes back to Solomon. Go back to what some of y'all deem the Old Testament. There's no such thing as Old Testament. Oh, wow. I just realized how late it is. I did not have a clue. We were supposed to have class. Okay. I'm going to have to finish this up. Well, you know what? It's too late. Gosh, I got so many makeups. I swear. Next semester, we're going to have just 3 days where I go ham on these classes. Well, can't go ham no more. Where I go, where I go vegan on these classes. Because and I only do them like 3 days a week. I am messing this thing up. Okay. Anyways, got too much life going on right now. But anyways, you said if the fathers carry seed, that's how lineage was kept. So there's no such thing as mixed. Okay. So if you as a father, if a father were to impregnate a woman, right? And if the woman had a daughter and if the father never had a son, we're basically saying the father's lineage died. Problem with that is though, even though there's blood that's there, you know, the DNA of the father, you know, like the DNA of the mother is in the child and the DNA of the child is in the mother whenever they're born, which means that the father and the child and the mother all become one. Right? If we're talking about scientifically speaking, I'm not going off of somebody else's reference points, but if you check, right? So once again, though, even if you're going to do that, you're going to say, okay, well, it was the father, so Joseph did this or whatever. Well, okay, you know what? And that's what I was going to ultimately, because we don't want to talk about adoption or being grafted in, right? Or even the stranger, the immigrant. Solomon, when he prays over the temple, Solomon uh, Malach at Ava or at Malach at Yastel at Davad, right? Or at Bat Davad, or at Ban Davad. Excuse me. When we're talking about him, we have to make sure that we get into places where we have a proper conversation about it. Solomon prayed over the temple. He said, Yah, we pray towards you. We pray towards the temple. Anybody that's of Israel, we ask that you bless them and you keep them, and you keep them even as they are directed and praying in this direction towards the temple. But we also pray that if a stranger come in and learn your laws and learn your ways, and they pray towards this temple as well, that you also cover them as well. Graft in. So at some point it gets to a place to where, yes, Yastel, we are the root. But also you're going to have to teach those that are coming in, and you're so busy trying to separate from those that are coming in, you got to be careful. But you're talking about the bloodline, yeah, sure. Okay, question for you. Where's your paperwork? Because if you're going to be strict, tadach, where's your paperwork? You see what I'm saying? Because every year, every Levite had to make sure that their paperwork was in order. If you haven't shown your paperwork, then you're not Levite. If you don't make sure every 50 years you checking in, you're not even of your tribe. It's as if you're dead. You said blood, Israel, and strangers had different lines. Yep, because they never married into each other. You're absolutely correct, right? Of course they married into each other. But once again, we'll do whatever we can to make sure that we have to be there, because one of the things we don't like to talk about is the fact that we hated people that weren't Israelites. You can trace your lineage, so can I. I know you're probably thinking that you can talk about the typical this, that, or whatever. I can too. I trace my lineage back to Shwit. If you know about Shwit Nation, we're people that have to be counted in as having the proper blood. We're also people that keep scrolls. The scrolls that even, not just the scrolls that were written, the scrolls that were burned into so that nobody could go ahead and try to change it. So, Shalom Achir, or what some of you try to say Ak, because you're speaking modern Hebrew and not even the Avla that we spoke, or the Ivrit, if you want to be Nigerian about it. But that's something I connected to kind of sort of by blood, but I'm not really Nigerian. But once again, it depends. See, we're not going to talk about nuance. We're making the assumption here, even the assumptions being made, once again, instead of asking, where are you getting this from? Or how do you know this? Or how do you know this to be? Or how can you say that you're a source I should listen to? It's like, just like you can trace your family lineage, so can I. You said, is it Rome in the dead center of Europe? Sure. What does that mean? That means that therefore they have to automatically be black. Go to Croatia, go to England, go to France, go to Spain, go to Portugal, go many different places, and go look at some of the castles that you'll see black faces on. Just because somebody's in Europe doesn't mean they have to be white. And by the way, once again, we're trying to discuss that as far as the scientific meaning and even the actual lawful meaning, there's no such thing as a white person. Where can you get all of the information I'm speaking? I don't know where you can get every single piece of it. I mean, there's much of it to be looked at, but you can Google some of the stuff that I'm talking about, or go look up, I've given some of the book titles and stuff already. I don't know if I have a book title for every single thing, because some of this stuff is stuff that I've been teaching on stuff. People don't believe it, but believe it or not, I've been teaching on stuff since I was 6, been traveling with people since I was 4. So you said, do I even, oh, wow. Well, you got to be better than that. Of course I do. My father of fathers is more important than that anyways. But not only do I know my father, I know where my father comes from. That's why I'm not an American. I'm not a U.S. citizen. I'm a non-citizen national. But once again, that's what I was saying. When people come on here, they prove who they are. So they're the people that you have to worry about. I don't know why people are worried about me. The person that came on here just now and hit that whole line, and I keep telling people, be careful. I don't know why they don't get it. Like, if we really wanted to go after y'all, like, it's easy. Like, this stuff can easily be screenshotted what your names are, and I could just report you. I don't want to do that, nor is that my desire. That's why we have moderators. People say, why do you have so many moderators? Why don't your moderators let people talk? Look at people on here who literally been calling us. I mean, might as well just call us the N-word. Somebody just said, I don't even know who my father is because of the color of my skin. But you'll say that the color of your skin doesn't matter. Where was I born? I was actually born in the United States of Maryland, United States of America in Maryland. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter though, because if you know how law works, it doesn't matter where you're from. It matters who you're from. This is why I'm a non-citizen national, so I can declare who I am rather than have to worry about where I am. Until the 14th Amendment, nobody cared about where you were from anyways, no matter who you were from. And it still does. That's why a lot of people have those birth certificates, don't even know that you're 14th Amendment citizens under a corporation. 28 USC 3002 15A, right? 28 USC 3002 15A. It tells you clear as day, that's United States Code. 28 USC 3002 15A declares to you quite easily, right? Without any question. Subsection A says the United States is a corporation. Subsection B says it's a board. That's why you have a president, vice president, secretary, all that. And subsection C tells you that it's instrumentalization. In other words, it can be traded as a negotiable instrument. It's basically something to make money off of. And if you know how corporations work, corporations have owners, which is by law, if Congress tries to put anything together, they have to have somebody who's from the corporations that have been allowed to be in these meetings. They get to go to the meetings, and Congress can't even make law unless corporations have representatives there to ensure that what the corporations want gets turned into law. See what I'm saying? It's nuance. We need nuance, but you don't even have the nuance, right? So you're more concerned about where were you born? Because I know the next thing coming up. Well, if you were born in Maryland, then you must be an American. Not so. Look on your passport, application, DS-11, DS-11, and look on the first page that you would fill out, page 5, but page 1 out of 2 that you fill out, and look in the section that you're not supposed to fill out until somebody says until somebody says you can sign there. And when you read the first sentence of the paragraph, you will discover that it says this is for you to either be known as a U.S. citizen or a non-citizen national, and you don't even know the difference because you think it's more important where you come from than who you come from. But it's always been important. That's why, once again, going back to what I was talking about even earlier with reparations, you do not get reparations not because people hate you all the time, but also too they can't give reparations to non-people. We think that people is the plural of person, which, by the way, there could be a natural person or artificial person by law. Look it up, right? People think I just come up. Oh, I don't even. Oh, there we go. People think I just come up with this stuff out the blue, right? But look it up. Like, I know it's backwards on TikTok. Black's Law Dictionary, and it's not written by a Black person or for Black people. This is the most widely recognized. The person's last name is Black. It's the most widely recognized Western law dictionary that's used. And look up in here person. There's natural person, there's artificial persons or artificial person, and then the plural of person is persons. What is a people? A people by definition is a nation. A people by definition is a nation. I'm sorry, mind over matter. I apologize. There's a lot of people asking me a lot of questions and things like that. So I apologize. If you need me to say it, I'll try to see if I can get to it if I can. Okay. Thank you so much for the question. I appreciate it. All right. So people are ignorant of what I'm talking about because ignorance of the law is no excuse to break it, but you keep breaking the law because you keep trying to call yourself, well, actually, I guess you're not breaking the law, Western law. You're going ahead and calling yourself something that's artificial because you've never looked up these terms, right? Like, for example, you don't know. See, this nuance. You think that anything that somebody told you in school is true. And so you're trying to use school things as if I'm supposed to agree with that. Some of you are throwing out school stuff like, well, in school they taught us, or you don't know this, or I've got my degree, or I know where my family comes from, or this and that. You're going to do all this stuff. And it's like, hey, do you not know that all you got to do is open up actual law to find out what I'm saying is correct? For example, this is when people get in trouble because you don't know how to do this. Don't just do this. This is for educational purposes only, right? Don't just do this without actually knowing how to do it. I'm telling you straight up. So if you go do it, this is recorded. I'm telling you straight up, don't go do this unless you know how to do this, unless your paperwork is sound, unless you are a non-citizen national, unless you know how to do this, right? But hear what I'm saying, right? You don't have to drive just because you're in a car. You can travel. If you know the difference, then you can travel. You don't have to have a driver's license to get behind the wheel of a vehicle. You only drive if you're being employed. So some of you have registered with the state and you belong to the state. And so you're saying when you drive, you're employed by the state. Some of you need to drive because you're at your job. So you just drive, like for the job. But if you're not driving for the job, or if you're not traveling for the job and they don't require you to have a license to work for them, to be able to travel to and from work. If they don't require that, then why you have a license? To have a license, you got to register with the state. Just like that birth certificate is basically a license. And you've registered your child with the state. You don't have to register your child with the state, just like you don't have to register your car with the state. But I tell you that, and you, because you don't know how law works and you don't know the nuance, you'll get in all this stuff, right? For example, here's another nuance. Should you ever tell a judge you understand? If the judge says, do you understand? Should you ever say yes? The answer to that is no. Never say that you understand. Why? Because the word understand is the judge saying, are you willing to stand under whatever I say? So the answer is always no. You can even tell them, I comprehend, but I do not understand. And they'll get really upset with you when you do that. Right? But people who don't comprehend the nuance, you're ready to argue. You're ready to fight. You see what I'm saying? Nuance is everything. We had a bunch of people coming on because the only thing they could see is Romans were not white. That's all they can see. And not once did they look for Tartarian. Not once did they look for DNA. Not once did they see African American on here. Not once did they say, what is your definition of white? Because it's all about all one way or nothing at all. That's your mindset. You have to ask yourself why in your mindset you're even under their, like some of you are under their jurisdiction just mentally. They got you. You're carrying on a fight that's not even my fight. I could care less about black versus white. I'm trying to tell you why you should care less about black or white, but it's not my fight. You got to ask yourself why that's your fight. You got to ask yourself why you got to be left or right, as if you don't have two parts of your body. You have to ask yourself why you have to be conservative or liberal, as if some things you shouldn't be conservative over and some things you should not be liberal over. You got to ask yourself why you have to be Republican or Democrat when you're in a democratic republic. You got to ask yourself, matter of fact, why you think this is a country when by law this is a corporation. And why you will fight against somebody trying to help you with something to cause you to, even in your captivity, as we talked about earlier today, even in your captivity, manage yourself, manage your affairs. Nobody wants to be held accountable. Oh, I see you. I hear you on there. Yeah, we didn't get to go that deep into it. We kind of started off in it, but I was kind of using it as a launching pad to kind of get into some other things nuanced, and then people got caught on certain pictures. You said what? Oh yeah, amen. Yeah. Why don't you know each state is a country? Right? Like you keep talking about Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. Washington, D.C., by law, right? This thick thing right here, right? There's a lot of information in here. Look up some of this stuff. By law, Washington, D.C. was a territory, right? Was not a city. Don't get it twisted. It was a territory. And it's not as big as what you think. See, when you say the city of Washington, D.C., well, city of Washington, D.C. is not even the territory of Washington, D.C. And it's called Washington, D.C. because you have Washington, Father God, right? That's where you get it's coming off the Osiris Netcher. He's supposed to be the modern day Osiris. That's why he has his phallus sticking up. You call it the obelisk, right? And on the other side of the mall, you have Columbia on top. She's supposed to be the modern day Isis. They're telling you a Kemetic story and trying to rephrase it so that he would be the father of your nation. Oh, this is a dictionary. It's just called Black's Law Dictionary. Like I said earlier, it's just a dictionary. Black's Law Dictionary. Person's last name is Black, right? But these are laws. These are principles, right? And so people who don't like laws, people who don't like accountability, you just allow somebody else to tell you everything that you think there is. Right? Like I said before, not all skin folk is kinfolk. I don't think that just because you look like me that you're righteous. And I don't think that because you do not look like me that you're evil. If that's your mindset, you're coming with somebody else's mindset. And you must ask yourself, why is that the first thing that was in your mind? I gave you a factual statement. And the first thing that you needed to do was fight against my belief that you're evil. You have to ask yourself, who taught you that? It's like when people talk about the patriarchy. People listen to me speak and say, "Oh, that sounds patriarchal." I'll tell people, my culture is not your culture, so my patriarchs hit different. And people don't like that when I say that, but it's real because you think that all patriarchs are the same. No, no, no. Like my patriarchs are Mansa Musa, who was questioned by a Muslim who came there and was mad because there were some people who were Muslim. There were some women that had their breasts hanging out and everything. And he was so upset because they weren't covered up. He said, look, where you come from, that's fine. But he said, oh, in my kingdom, I'm Muslim. There's a lot of people that are Muslim, but it does not mean that everybody here has to be Muslim. And if some of them still do some of the stuff from their culture that they had, and they don't want to give that up to convert, by all means, they have every right to. It doesn't mean that just because I'm Muslim, that every woman must bow down to whatever my demand is. That's one of my patriarchs. So you make the assumption that I have one of these gentlemen like Thomas Jefferson or George Washington or Monroe or Madison or Polk or Taylor. By the way, all of those presidents, Virginian slave owners, right? You make the mistake of thinking that that's my father. That's the father of your nation if you still think of yourself as an American citizen. That's the father of your nation. That's not my father. Okay, Spin, you once again, you're just coming on. I don't need to go over it. If you actually want to learn what we're talking about, this is recorded. You can go look for it, right? Because you don't even know what the definition of white here is, right? If you have melanin in your veins, if you have melanin in your body, if you have a pineal gland, you cannot be white by definition. Go look it up. Okay. So you see what I'm saying? We're trying to figure out how to get people to be one, but you don't want to look at nuance because nuances mean you got to start holding yourself accountable for the nook and the cranny, for the etymology, for the pieces of the word by every character that's in the word. Yes, they were. Okay. Once again, go ahead and look up. See, if you want to go somewhere where the definition of white matches what you want, then you need to go find that place. Here, we've already told you what the definition of white is according to what those people. Because watch this. Are you ready for this? Romans, even if you want to consider them to be what you consider to be white, they wouldn't have known what a white person was. Do you hear what I'm saying? This is what you got. See the nuance. Your ability to not even be empathetic to somebody else in their own time period tells a lot about you. Think about it now. Your your lack of being willing to empathize with somebody else is showing a lot about you. Somebody in Rome at the time that you're trying to defend wouldn't have even known what a white person was. Matter of fact, if I go through your history of your people, even if you are white or have white blood in you or whatever you want to call it, if we were to go back through history, all I got to go back is like 400 or 500 years, and people don't know what the term white means yet. You said, may you ask for proof? I'm telling you proof right now. I've already brought up certain books. I've already told you to go read stuff. If you like to look into stuff, that's fine. But to be like, hey, I'm not going to listen to you at all until you tell me that I can look in this book of somebody that I respect because I don't respect you because I don't know you, but I know this person because their name's on the book. I've written books myself, but those books don't have to do with this particular. And actually, some of them, one of them does. If you'd like to read it, but you would probably say, well, you wrote the book. I need somebody else to look at. I'm talking about something from my tribal experience, from our culture, from our perspective. It might not be what you want it to be, but that's fine. Right? I'm not concerned. Like where I come from, this is how we live. So you can accept it and then study and find out what I'm saying is there. But we on for hours at a time. Oh, well, thank you for the love. Appreciate it. We're on hours at a time. So if you choose to look the stuff up or whatever it is, it's fine. But like I said, I'm talking about stuff that goes, I've gone several different ways to talk about this stuff already, right? I've mentioned the Flavius Josephus. I've mentioned, I didn't mention Oluwadach Equiano today, but you can keep on going. We can talk about Dr. Ivan van Sertima. We could talk about Dr. Laia Africa. But see, these are names that people wouldn't want anyways because they say that they're people who agree with me. So but if you want people to disagree with me, there are plenty. But I would say even in a disagreement, start asking questions, right? Ask yourself why Christopher Columbus was sailing with Africans back in 1482. Why weren't you taught that? And do you know the relevance of what that has to do with how he was able to get over in 1492? And then in 1493, the Pope was able to make sure that he made the doctrine of discovery that actually was started in 1452. In 1493, he makes it official. Do you even know why that is? See, it's like, but if you don't give me a book that says, that's what libraries are for. I apologize, but sometimes I can't give you every single book. Sometimes there are things that literally I've read, I've read and taught on this stuff for decades. I'm only 40, but I've been teaching some of this stuff since I was 6. Yes, Yashua does love me. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. He loves me very much. Right? So you hear what I'm saying? You said Rome is the capital of Italy. Are you saying Italians are not white? I'm here to tell you that not everybody that you I'm here to tell you that what you consider to be a Roman is not necessarily always what you consider to be a Roman. I'm telling you to tell you that not every Roman is white. I'm here to tell you that white doesn't mean exactly what you think it means. I'm here to tell you that before somebody knew what white was, right? Somebody had to explain to them what white was, because nobody was considered to be white because everybody's considered to have color. Do you not know that white people have color in their cheeks? Matter of fact, if you see a white person that loses color in their cheeks, you think they're sick. Do you not? Are you right? I mean, I'm not making anything up there. If you had a white friend and they began to lose blood in their cheeks, or they began to lose color in their cheeks, you would begin to think that something was wrong. You would call them pale. Even though they are white, you would still say they look pale. Why would you say that the white person looks pale? You would say the white person looks pale because nobody's white. Even people that suffer through albinoism, there are very few albinos that get to the point to where you start thinking they have no color at all. Very few. And even they still have melanin in them, because you can't survive, you can't live, you could not have been created without melanin. And yes, to a certain degree, a lot of us have freckles and things like that. Yeah. What I'm trying to tell you is that once again, you're trying to use terminology that is not my terminology. Now, if in your culture, if you need to go by something called white to be able to say that's what you identify as, hey, fight for it all you want. I'm just telling you, as far as the people that you keep trying to label as white, they don't know what that is. And if you don't want to empathize with them, or tell or be like, hey, maybe I should listen to the Roman. Like, maybe I should listen to the Roman, because the Roman never describes themselves as white. You want to know why? Because they would never have described themselves as white. Like, it's pretty clear cut. Right? There was a time that the Englishmen would have never considered themselves to be white. There was a time that the Spanish would have never considered themselves to be white. The Russian would have never considered themselves to be white. Matter of fact, when you go over to some places in Russia and you start talking about white, at first they look at you strange, because they don't know what you're talking about. Because they don't have that same mindset stuck in them. But you're fighting for something that people don't even call themselves. You have to ask yourself, why do you have to be so right that people can't even identify as what they call themselves? Exactly. Where is white? And just like people try to ask with us, where is black? Where's the nation called black? Even though that's a bad example, because Kimmy literally means black, right? And there's people that are known as blue black. Then there's a tribe known as blue black, and there's a tribe known as slippery blacks. There's a tribe known as Kush. Kush, literally people that are black, right? That's where you get Ethiopia, the Greek version of Kush. Ethiopian means those who are blackened by the sun, right? But go look for the tribe that's called white. Oh, thanks, man. Go look for the tribe that's called white. You tell me the tribe called white. Now, I can show you some KKK that believe they're white. I don't know if I call them a tribe, though. Maybe they call themselves one. I'm not sure. I'm not really trying to find out so much about them. In all honesty, I've had enough close encounters with them in my past that I don't need to have any more, right? Unless it's going to be under very controlled circumstances. Okay, white is the status. Maybe it's the status of the U.S. I'm just telling you, it's not my status. I'm gonna just put it like that. I had to do a little bit more research on that, because if they changed it to be one, hey, that's something I could be wrong on. But I'm just saying, like, my standard is not your standard, and I say that a lot, and people don't like it when I say that, but it's true. Like, we have different standards, and that's part of the problem. Is you think that everybody's standard has to be a very Eurocentric standard. What if it's not my standard? Oh, I'm sorry, DB. Look, I'm getting a lot of comments on different places, so I apologize. I'm missing some comments too at this point. So I apologize if I came at you the wrong way. Please forgive me. Um, so yes, so there's no nuance. You see what I'm saying? There's zero nuance in these conversations. Can you see it now? Like we've been on all this time, and we still are at the place where we're just getting people to identify with nuance. Are you seeing that? Salama, can you bring me a cup, please? Like one of the teacups, please. Right? Like we're in a place where we can't even have a conversation because there's no nuance. All right, Tada. Thank you, sir. Or Thawada for those that need that one. Right. But we're dealing with there's very little nuance. There's very little nuance in these conversations. And since there's no nuance, we can't have actual conversation. This is what's hurting the conversation, is that we can't actually come to a place of any agreement. See, nuance at least allows some agreement. You said, so what would we, as brown people, call ourselves? Because once you come out of the matrix, it's hard to go back. Well, I call myself my tribe. Once again, people asked me earlier, where are you from, or what people are you from, or what's the name of your tribe? So I would say Shwit. I would say Tisalagi. I would say Anakitawiya. I would say some people might even call it Cherokee. I would say Taino. Did I say Taino already? Omekshi. I would say Shwit, Ashanti, Igbo, Kemet, Kush. Right? Like there's a lot of things I can identify with. In a sense, you could say Bantu. I definitely could identify as Mali. And these are family members. Right? But also, too, I don't mind being called Black. I'm just saying in Western law, I would stay away from that. Because in Western law, they try to say that makes me a fake person. And I am not a fake person. I'm not an artificial person. I'm a natural person by law. And I'm part of a people. My people are a nation. So I identify with nations. And I'm trying to nation build. Right. So, when you say what should we call ourselves, it depends on what tribe you are, or if you need to be grafted in, if you can't figure out, because even a lot of this stuff, we've talked about this before, even a lot of that stuff that they do where they do the, what do they call that? The DNA, whatever, the DNA testing and all that, and they prick you and prod you and they save your blood and stuff. But they got in trouble because scientists started coming out and telling you guys that they said, hey, y'all should have came and asked us, because all these people that they keep saying the 23andMe and all that, they said that all those tests that you've been taking, they said there's no way we can actually compare your DNA to see if you actually come from the same people as people that died, thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago. They said there's no way. They said we can't do it. They got in trouble. You know how they got in trouble? Because they were testing, and they were a group of twins. Of course, they had to be, twins of a certain diaspora first, but there were twins that started coming out and saying, hey, they started suing. They started saying, hey, how is it that we're twins, but you're saying that this twin has this much Nigerian blood or whatever, and this twin has 0%? They were twins, come out of the same womb, from the same sperm. Like it doesn't make sense. Right? And then that's how they found out. And then they did some research, and they went and they asked some actual scientists who actually do deal with DNA. And the DNA scientists were like, yeah, that's cap. We can't do that. So all these people putting all the stock in this stuff, you don't know. And even if they do it, I've told these people this the longest, even if you get that done, it doesn't mean that like let's say that they say you got this much blood in you or whatever. What if the group of people that they found that DNA type in, even if it's maybe only 2 or 3 people they found in this area, what if they were people who were traveling through and for whatever reason ended up staying there or passing away there? And so now you're trying to say that those people that were there, that means that you're Nigerian. When the reality is that those might not have been Nigerians. Right? Like, so you got this really weird thing, and not you personally, but I'm just saying we have this really weird thing that we've been taught that's trying to tell us that we have to be something that we're not. And
plus Nigeria is European construct. The tribes don't.
Right. Yeah. And my wife was saying, even look at the construct, right? Nigeria is not even, like there were a group of people known as Niger or Niger, but Nigeria was not even a place. Nigeria, matter of fact, if you do the research, Nigeria was actually named after of somebody who owned a corporation, was named after his mistress. Or I'm sorry, not named after his mistress. His mistress named the country, or what you call the country. So what you call the country of Nigeria used to be just a group of tribes that never would have considered themselves to be Nigerian. Some of them might have been considered to be Niger or Niger, but they never considered themselves to be Nigerian. And then all of a sudden, one day, somebody who they sleeping with on the side chick, speaks in her little person's ear, and next thing you know, now you call yourself Nigerian when you never were Nigerian. See, there's nuance. Sister Sage said hello. Babe, Sister Sage said hello to you. So but I'm just saying we got all this stuff going on. And we don't want to be honest about it. That somebody's messed up your whole mentality of how you identify as anything. You see the mentality? If you want to know where he's gathering us from or whatever, he's getting you ready while you're in captivity. Get that part together first, right? Jeremiah 29 is what we were talking about earlier this rising, right? Let's get that together first before we start doing the stuff and questioning and all those things, right? Jeremiah 29, right? What do we do? Verses 1 through, how far did we go today? Verse 13, verse 14, somewhere in there. But that's getting a little outside of what we're trying to talk about. It's very nuanced, right? It's very nuanced. Very much so nuanced, right? And we're so busy looking from miracle to miracle or looking for the surface level stuff that we don't want to manage anything. In the middle of the miracle should be the management, and the miracle of the topical should be like the analytical. And we don't have the ability to analyze. You know why you don't have the ability to analyze? Analyzing takes actual, like, using statistics properly, and people don't want to do that. We talked about statistics in our series, This System is Sus. This is how you get people to tell you that 13% of the population commits 50% of the crime, which doesn't even make sense because out of our population, which is really closer to 14% when we looked at the numbers and did the math, but 14% of the population therefore commits 50% of the crime, when the reality is out of all of us that are here, what is it like? We got up to, out of, if we rounded it off, right? If there's 320 million Americans, if you broke that down to 14%, then that would be something like 420 or 442. So even 42 million of us. Out of that 42 million, only 1.6% of us are going to go to court. Doesn't mean you might not get arrested or something, but only out of that, only 1.6% of us are even going to get arrested or go to court, rather. Some people don't even make it to court, unfortunately. And when you look at that 1.3%, excuse me, and out of that 1.3%, you get to 0.6%, 0.65 or 0.6% of it, something like that, that actually are going to be found guilty, and that's guilty of the cases. So of the cases that you're dealing in, right, that means that over half of us, when we go to or over half the cases tied to us, because somebody can have multiple cases or multiple charges, right? So out of those cases or charges, over half of those charges or cases, you're going to be found guilty in. How does that mean that we commit 50% of the crime? You see, so people don't know how statistics work. Right? The same people who, once again, using racist rhetoric and stuff, they don't know how statistics work. And thank you for proving yourselves, because you helped prove my point. Nobody wants to talk about the nuance. Right? It is often interesting. You know what the really interesting part is? You know, most people that are into racism, they have zero capacity to have nuance. So the people who are coming out tonight, what have people said tonight? Praise God for you, by the way. I celebrate you, because when you try to depreciate, you just show how much we should be appreciated and valued, right? But what's some of the stuff, like people who come on here and said, I must not have a father. People have come on here and said that we definitely commit the crime, that we're hairy, that this and that or whatever, all this stuff. And when you say this stuff, like, I mean, it just shows simply that you're making my point, that you have no nuance. You said, so you're not the natives today, you are the Romans now. once again, time out. Stay with us long enough to hear. I never said that I'm Roman. And I've literally said today that just because the color of my skin looks similar to somebody else, it doesn't mean that we're the same, right? I told you Cleopatra would be considered by most of you today to be somebody that's black, but it doesn't mean that she's African because she's Greek. And yes, there are many Greeks that you would think of as being black today. Hang in there because you're so little into nuance that you can't listen to somebody. Your mindset is because I'm in similar clothing to somebody you can't stand. Somebody called me earlier today a hotep, right? So since I'm this hotep peddler, that's what in your mind I am. You have already decided to not listen to something where in reality you agree with me that I am not a Roman. I do not hold up Roman romantic views. I'm not somebody who's trying to be Greco-Roman in any way, shape, or form. I'm not somebody who's trying to say that Romans have to bow down to me because of my skin color. I'm not somebody who says you must listen to me because of my skin color. If I were, I would consider myself to be somebody who has a lot to learn about nuance. It seems like you have a lot to learn about nuance. Why not just listen to see if maybe we're in more agreement than in disagreement? You know why? Because you don't have room for nuance. See, that's the point of this. See, I should have just left it on this the whole time. People think this is the only picture that's been up. I should have just only left this picture up because this would have shown how little nuance people have. Once again, nobody once has said, what is Tartarian DNA? It's right here. Not once. Not once did somebody ask, what does that mean? Everybody's stuck on the word white. You know why? Because you have no ability to look at the in-between. Right? We've already talked about the Caucasian. The Caucasian come from the Caucasus Mountains. Romans don't come from the Caucasus Mountains. You see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to come at you. I'm just trying to say, see, like we're trying to say there's details to it. There you go, right? The word white is something that somebody's using out of context and somebody created it. Not even necessarily created. We knew what white was, but it had nothing to do with color. There was not one person on the planet that identified with white. That's a new thing. You identifying as white is only about 400 years old. By the way, 400 years sounds about the same time as something that we talked about happened to a certain group of people. So when we got enslaved, you got enslaved. More so you mentally than anything else, but you got enslaved too. And don't even realize that you're fighting as a slave. You are fighting so hard to stay in the chain of white. Why? Why do you need to be white? Why do you need to be American? Why do you need to be a public citizen? Why are you fighting so hard? Why you represent Brooklyn? Why you represent South Side? Why you represent the West? Why you represent West Side? Why? Okay, homeless dog. First of all, welcome. I don't have time. Like, look at the recording if you'd like to actually see what the definition of the words that we're using are, because they're not the same as your definitions, obviously. Right? You see what I'm saying? No nuance. Not one time is everybody stuck on the word white. By the way, did I say Romans were African? You see what I'm saying? But the mindset that you have says that if I say Romans were not white, that they must be African in your mind. Never said that. I just told you that Cleopatra was not white, and yet at the same time, she is not African. No, zero nuance. You're not willing to have a nuanced conversation. You're not willing to look at anything outside of what your little prism is. And I'm sorry to say little, maybe it's a vast prism, but it's not based off of proper interpretation, whatever it is. Whatever size it is, the construct of it is not based off of the foundation that should be proper interpretation when it deals with somebody's tribe. You said, who said the Romans were white? Well, obviously you're just coming on because there's quite a few people who obviously said the Romans are white. If that's your way of saying hello, how are you doing? Right? You think somebody literally made this that we're using as a slide because zero people have said that Romans were white? You see, you're argumentative. You're not willing to have nuance. Look up Cheddar Man. I'm not looking up Cheddar Man right now. What is it that I need to get from Cheddar Man that's going to stop everything I'm saying? I'm sorry. I apologize. Right? I don't know if you've even said hello yet or anything like that. Sure, all people are melanated now. You're only thinking about the outside of the skin. You know that melanin is always measured from the outside, from the inside out, not the outside in. It supports the claims. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me get myself out of that there. Right. Okay. So I'll look up Cheddar Man. I've heard of Cheddar Man. I can't remember what it is right now at this moment. You said, do I mean by neurons? Neurons or neurons? You mean neurons? Oh, I'm not chilling. I'm chilling pretty well. When people call you the N-word and all manner of evil or whatever, I'm pretty chill for that. Right. But if you're saying don't defend yourself or like defend yourself in a way that like makes you dance a little better or whatever, I don't know if I'm gonna do that. But I appreciate you though. But the further back you go. But are you talking about neurons or are you talking about neutrons? Neurons, you talking about just what's in the brain. I mean, everybody got neurons. That ain't have nothing to do with what's white or black, right? Are you talking about neutrons? Neutrons aren't real. Neutrons are only I'm sorry, a theory. But I'm not sure if what you mean. I'm talking about a neuron. Neurons are just in the brain, though. Like you're talking about melanin. Melanin's all over every part of your body. There's not a part of your body that exists. Really, technically, there's not much of anything that exists, at least that's an animal or a human, that doesn't have melanin. Or if you guys try to break the animal kingdom into something different than the insect kingdom, think them too, right? Shoot, even rocks and stuff like that have melanin attached. Matter of fact, your device that you're using, if you're listening to me on any device tonight, which you pretty much have to be using, that device has melanin in it. They use melanin in your computer chips, so you can't even listen to me without melanin. So, sorry. So you can't even use it. So yeah. But if you're talking about a neuron, neurons are just, we all have neurons. Carbon, sure, yeah. People try to say melanin is just carbon or whatever. Carbon is melanin. Carbon and melanin go hand in hand. So I won't go into which one is better to use or whatever. Like, but we're dealing with the same thing. But anyways, we're getting close. At this point, I don't even think anybody really wants to talk about nuance anymore. Seems like we're just talking about who's right or who's better than or whatever. And at the end, you said stop blabbering, Romans, we're strong and light skinned. Okay. What does that have to do with what I'm saying? Okay. So you agree with me? See what I'm saying? I don't even get it. If somebody was willing to listen long enough, be like, oh yeah, so you agree with me. That's what I've been saying. And I said that they come in different shades, and it depends on who we're talking about. But the reason why you can't have a true conversation, the reason why some of you can't handle truth, is because you don't want. So you said, who cares? They're long gone. You think that all Romans are gone? Okay. Okay. And you think that all Negroes are black, don't you? You think that Negro and black are interchangeable. That's what they teach you. That's why a lot of Moors are out here fighting about the word negro, thinking that negro came from Spanish people when the word negro existed when Carthaginians were around, and even before them. If you even know when the Carthaginians were there. And that's a great point, right? Who cares? And then they literally come on and make a comment about why they care. That's just, how you doing, babe? My wife is on the Honorable Mind. Check her out on TikTok, YouTube, her website, and Pinterest at Bloom and Flourish, not A&D, the letter N. Bloom and Flourish. She is a healer, herbalist, chemist, and biologist by degree. Or you can also check her out at Bloom and Flourish too right now. But you see what I'm saying? I think the point has been made over and over and over again. This is what part of the problem we're having with people is that you, and not you guys personally, right? That the shoe fits weird if it doesn't take it off, or think about it. And by the way, there's some things that I need to be better at nuance at. Somebody asked me a question today, and I had to tell them, in all honesty, part of this is probably going to be my flesh poking up. You know, they asked me a definition of something or why I don't like certain word usage for certain things. And I told them, like, I'm being honest with you, bro. I don't know if this is necessarily righteous or not, but I'm going to just answer your question. You said nobody was white. Yeah, there's no such thing as a white person by definition. If you have melanin, you can't be white. Once again, stop going off what somebody told you. You see what I'm saying? Like, didn't even say, I'll ask the question. What are you talking about? What are you defining? Once again, let me ask this. What tribe in the world exists that's called white? Here's a troll. Well, we're gonna end on this, and we're gonna take our leave, and then we're gonna but I just want to show you. See, no nuance. Something this small would literally disintegrate racism. But the person who swears that I'm the reverse racist or whatever, they're not willing to attack racism at all. They want racism to exist. They're raised in it so much that they don't even realize. Nope. You said the Aryans are the Aryan race, right? The Aryan race. Now, I'm not talking about what other people would say was Aryan. People who were original Aryans never called themselves white. You see that? It's like when they said the Germans, you know how Hitler would say the Germans? Germans, Germanic people are not even the people that you call Germany now. They're not the same people. Did you know that? So you think I'm just talking about white people displacing black people? No. Many tribes do that all the time, right? Many tribes do that all the time. You think that I'm talking about just a particular people. Many tribes do that quite often. Many tribes do that quite often, right? Displace others. People who are in Germany now are not Germanic. The people who were with or under Charlemagne, they're not the same people that are in Germany now. That was a lie given, right, by propaganda. Propaganda started by Hitler. The people in Germany are not Germanic. But somebody called himself Germany, you just went with it. By the way, was Hitler even Germanic, even by modern standards? Hitler's not even from Germany. Hitler was from Austria-Hungary, and his people were Jews. He didn't want people to know who he was. He killed off some of his own. This educational purposes only. Sorry, strong language. He took out some of his own family members, allowed them to be taken out, and people who knew that they were his family members covered it because they knew that the propaganda needed him to be at the front because they were trying to make him out to be a non-human, to try and make him a god. By the way, God is a Germanic term. God, good, Goodspeed, Godspeed, Guten Tag, goodbye, God be with ye. He was their God.
It says for
Educational purposes only. Yeah.
Stevens, his son name is Solomon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people don't know that your name is Solomon. Not everybody on here is always on here.
Oh,
But I'm just trying to tell you, I'm just trying to show you that you're living in a world and a lot of it is fallacy. By the way, the English language, you don't speak Anglo. That's why it's called Anglo-ish. And 40% of your language is French because the kings of England are all French. Up to a certain point, at least, till you get to King Henry VIII, and then you get to his last daughter, the last surviving child that he had, Victoria. Or not, she wasn't Victoria. Hold on. What was her name? You had King Henry VIII, his son, then you had Bloody Mary, Queen Mary, and you had somebody else. No, it might have been Elizabeth. She might have been Elizabeth. I can't remember. Whoever the last of the Tudors was, whoever she is.
Anne. Was it Anne?
No, I don't think it's Anne. Anne might be somebody who's married to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, his daughter, the last person of his family on the throne was one of his daughters. Neither daughter had a child. But yeah, so but up until then, at least, it doesn't mean that it didn't go further. I just can't remember right now on top of my head. But up until then, King Henry VIII and then his 4 children, they were French. The English or Anglo was considered to be the language of the poor, and they didn't change it from the language from French until English. They were Roman Catholic. It wasn't until King Henry VIII wanted to stop using Latin as a fu kind of to the Pope that he basically decided to go ahead and take. He decided to stop taking it from French to stop using Latin in the Bible. And when they became Protestant, took over the Protestant movement, so he could become the Pope of the Protestant movement. That's why King Charles right now is basically your Pope. If you're a Christian, he's your Pope. If you're a Protestant, at least, he's your Pope. You don't know that, but that's how that works. The Pope of Protestantism is the King or the Queen of England. You said I'm wrong? Okay, tell me where I'm wrong. So you're telling me that King Henry VIII was not a Roman Catholic. You're telling me that King Henry VIII was not under the Pope. You're telling me that King Henry VIII wasn't asking the Pope if he could keep getting divorces. You're telling me that the Pope never said that King Henry VIII, right, should he couldn't condone his divorce. You're telling me King Henry VIII didn't leave. You're telling me there wasn't already a movement called the Protestant movement. You're telling me he didn't Shanghai the movement, so to speak. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't use somebody else's culture to do that. That's something I got to get out of the habit of. Maybe so we can't say he didn't take over somebody else's movement. That he didn't take over their movement and then make himself the Pope. By the way, and we know this because King Henry was the first Pope of Protestantism, especially for those that were in England. Then right after him, his son became the one that they put up on all the walls because he was the second Pope. His son dies early. So then Queen Mary, his child, comes back. Now she was a bastard because he wouldn't accept her because he had divorced her mom, remember? Because her mom wouldn't give her a son. Then all of a sudden, she ends up being the person on the throne instead of her younger sister. She's not a Protestant, though. She's a Roman Catholic, and she tries to get them to go back into being Roman Catholics. But by this point, it's like being a Republican versus Democrat. You can't try to take the Protestant movement and get it back into the Roman Catholic thing. Now we put we drawn our lines in the sand, and they almost came to a civil war. Then she ends up not having a child herself, and then her younger sister takes over and then puts what her brother and her father established back into place, where she becomes the Pope of England again and the Pope of Protestantism. Just because you don't know a thing doesn't mean it's not true. You see what I'm saying? But there's nothing that I've said to you that you cannot look up. There's not one thing that I've said to you that you cannot look up for yourself to see if I'm telling you the truth. Now, maybe nobody's given it to you in succession, timeline-wise, but it doesn't mean there's not one thing that I haven't given to you that cannot be considered to be the truth. And somebody already got to you, by the way, but just in case you're still on, you threatening me or whatever, you threatening my life, if you really willing to talk that stuff or whatever, you come see me, but you're not even willing to show your face, so I'm not tripping. But once again, y'all got to be careful. Y'all know this stuff is recorded, right? Like, I can just go back through here and just tell them who you are. Like, if you get muted or blocked, I can look you up before we get off here and just make sure that you report it. Be careful. I'm somebody that you're not bothering me. But somebody out here, they'll hold you to that standard. You said snitch. Well, hey, in your place, snitches get stitches. People who go ahead and try to say something against my life, they can get stitches too. But like I said, most people ain't willing to talk. They talk crazy, but they, whatever. You said when you say Roman, you're talking about many different races and nationalities. No, if I'm saying Romans, I'm talking. Well, if you want to talk about as far as the state of Rome, you have to realize the state of Rome is not the same as the Roman Empire, right? That's why you have Europe, and you have Rome. Europe is anything that belonged to Rome. You think of Europe now as only being something that's actually a lot smaller on the map than what you think it is. But Europe used to be anything that belonged to Rome, Europa. Now, if you're talking about the Roman Empire, Europa, then sure, there's a lot of mix, and including even in the main parts of Rome, because Rome was not just simply only this, right? Rome was the city of Rome, right? So we're talking about just a city, right? But if we're talking about the Roman people, there's a group of people, there's a group of people, or there's a group of persons, even if you want to go there, that are called Romans, right? Now, just because I'm saying these Romans look a certain way, once again, doesn't mean that I'm saying I'm Roman. I'm not Roman. You know this, right? Like, are you getting, like, I'm not trying to come at you. I'm just trying to make sure everybody comprehends that. This is why we got to talk about nuance. I hope somebody comprehends that you can talk about a Roman and say that they look similar to you in skin color and still say, that's not me. Once again, you think it's about where somebody comes from, not who somebody comes from. Who you are is always more important than where you are. That's why many of you will never be anything more than what your birth certificate says, as far as in the eyes of the system, because you think where you're from is more important than who you're from. But if you really want to change your status, who you're from should always supersede where you're from. And if you get that, you'll be a lot better. But see, that takes what? Nuance. You said we're basically all Romans. I'm not romantic. So what about the Etruscans? We talked about them earlier. What about them? I guess you're saying that the Romans took some of the stuff they did, but even Etruscans, I'm not Etruscan either. Matter of fact, a lot of people talk a lot of stuff about Etruscans and don't even study them. Because to be honest, if you study them, there's a lot of holes in it because the Etruscans were so wiped out. We don't know what's actually romantic and what's Etruscan. But you say, you said, okay, so if white is a thing, do you even know what white culture you are? There you go, right? By the way, a lot of white people, like, go to other, I'm not trying to say that in Europe they have no concept of white, but go to Europe, right? When we were in Belgium, I'm pretty sure as I walked the streets and everything and had conversations, even though a few of them there don't like us that much, but as I walked the streets and everything, I never heard anybody in Belgium refer to themselves as white. When I went to Italy, never referred to anybody referred to themselves as white. I'm not saying that they don't comprehend what you're talking about, but it's not something that comes up. Now, I've never been to, and my wife is somebody who obviously would be considered to be black. I've never been to Switzerland. She was an exchange student over there. Babe, when you went over to Switzerland, were people always referring to themselves as white?
No, only those who had been outside of Switzerland and understood the stretch of, like, so the family I lived with, they knew they were considered white, but they also said they didn't want to be called white because in South America, they lived in South America.
Okay, yeah.
And in South America, they had a status, even though they had no money, because they followed the pastor, because they had quote unquote white skin, they were considered rich.
Mm-hmm.
And so for them, they understood the concept of being white in the world.
And didn't want to be called white because of how it worked. Okay. So that's people from Switzerland. Most people wouldn't consider themselves to be white there. If you really go to Spain, now in Spain, they bring white up around black people because they don't like Moors. But like when you go to these places, nobody refers to themselves as that. See what I'm saying? So you're so busy thinking that when Romans are not white, you in your mind are thinking that I am saying they must be me. I'm not Roman. You see what I'm saying? We could keep on going down this list. Like, if you go to China, people in China aren't trying to refer to themselves as yellow. That's not a thing over there, right? You know that, right? If you go and you talk to Native Americans, most of them, unless they're talking about how they were referred to as the red man, there's very few natives that are talking about themselves as being red.
When anybody around the world refers to white, they're talking about Americans. And usually they refer to them as Americans, not white.
Right. So I'm just saying, this concept that you have a white is not what you think it is. I'm not saying nobody knows what it is. I'm just saying you have this concept where you think that everybody's saying white like that. This is not real. It's not real. It never really was. And one of the reasons why, even some of the places where they consider white to be this and this or whatever, one of the reasons why, because they actually teach about it. They're open about it. They say, this is what happened in history. They say, this is why somebody got you to think that white was a real thing. And they said, we need to come out of that so that all of us can go back to being part of tribes and comprehending people and being empathetic. You know what I find amazing? Germany and Austria-Hungary and some other places, which still deal with a lot of racism, by the way, they don't use the term white, and that's supposed to be Nazis. But I have less problem. I'm not saying there's none over there, because there's plenty, right? But I'm telling you, they use those terms less than you do. That's interesting to me. Yeah, we talked about Septimius Severus earlier. He's the one who even built a lot of stuff that's still in England now, the English infrastructure and even the sewer system and stuff that people use over there to this day. But you see what I'm saying? Like, people over there who you would think are the very people who would be using these terms. They don't use it. So you got to ask yourself, are you fighting for what? You say this is about humanity, where everybody else in the world ain't really tripping off this word like you are. Everybody else in the world is not tripping off of this word, but you feel like it's wrong. And I'm trying to get you to see it's not just about your color. Nobody knows themselves as that except you. Or nobody's seeing somebody walk down the street and being like, oh, that's a white person. That's you. That's America mostly. And in place, you know what? The main places that it is in America or places where people are close to you, close to America. Central America, Canada. And in Canada, they don't really refer to themselves like that either as white. I'm not saying nobody does. Hear what I'm saying? The majority of people don't even use that stuff because it doesn't make sense because it's not something that they need to have. I'm saying this again. There's really no such thing as a white person because everybody has melanin. Anybody that has melanin, by definition, you cannot be white. If you've ever lived, if you've ever been born, you could not have been white. If sperm met the egg and impregnation happened, that as soon as that person began in that form of life, they could not have been white. And I've said this before. People don't believe me when I say white has no color, that it has to be bright, the absence of color, reflective, clear, see-through. But this is the last thing. See, nuance, just comprehending what words actually mean. And maybe some of you will calm down. You ready? I'll use this as an example all the time. It's the last thing I'll say, and then I got to take my leave. It is extremely late at this point. Right? What color is a white blood cell?
What happened to him?
It's okay, sir. I've got a screenshot, and it's got a different time. It's not mentioned. What color is a white blood cell? That never says in the Bible you'll be saved by the color of your skin. Exactly. Right? But a white blood cell has no color. It's clear. It's see-through, right? Okay. What color is polar bear's fur? What color is a polar bear's fur? It's not a polar bear. A grizzly bear is brown. What color is a polar bear's fur? Polar bear's fur is clear. Now the fur that's inside, that's the closest to it, underneath the clear fur, is actually black so that it attracts sunlight. Nope, polar bear's fur is not white, which is why when you get the polar bear away from snow, guess what happens to the polar bear's fur? It's no longer clear, but it's true. Like, look at it. The polar bear's fur, right? The outer fur that you see, go look it up. Scientifically speaking, ask them, go Google it real quick. What color is a polar bear's fur? You'll discover it has no color. It's clear. It's reflective, right? What color is, oh gosh, fur, there's something else I was going to say. Polar bear's fur, I always use the same three. The polar bear's fur, what color is a white blood cell? Oh, what color is snow? What color is snow?
Clear.
You said it turned into a Kodiak bear? No, a Kodiak bear is a Kodiak bear. And a grizzly is a grizzly, and a brown bear is a brown bear. A polar bear is a polar bear. Right? But snow is not white. Snow is clear. If you get enough of the snowflakes together, which snowflakes really are just what? Crystals that are trying to turn into water. So we're even dealing with a different thing because water also does what? Water carries minerals or carries whatever it's supposed to wash away. So you see something, you go, oh, that's white. But if you study a snowflake, if you look at a snowflake, right? A snowflake, especially if you can get a snowflake under a microscope, guess what? That snowflake is always going to be clear. Just because they had you grab some, see, this is where they teach you. In school, what did they do? They had us grab white paper that would unfold, right? They get you to have like a bunch of paper that was really long, and then you folded it up, and then you cut little patterns into it. You remember that? Anybody do that in school? And you cut it up, and then you would open it up, and it would be snowflakes, right? But in your mind, snowflakes therefore are white. But no, snow is not white. Snow is clear. Right? Snow is white. As a matter of fact, it would be, because snow is frozen water, right? So all you're having is frozen water that if it's cold enough, it stays frozen water, or connects, right? Or connects, or turns into water, connects with other things that at that point it's not even necessarily snow. It might be ice or something else. But snow, and by the way, ice would be clear too because it's water, right? But snow is just, it's clear, but you called it white. You said, you mean to tell me that a white cat is really a clear cat? What I'm here to tell you is that what you consider to be white is not necessarily white. What I'm saying is you think that this on my shirt is white because somebody had to tell you that white was a color in order for you to start believing white was a color. White was never a color. That's what I'm here to tell you. You think that you see a white cat and that must be a white cat. I didn't say a white cat has clear fur. I didn't say every animal has clear fur, did I? What I said is you could look up people that you should trust because people don't want to trust me. So go listen to people who will talk about polar bears. Go look up polar bears and go look up somebody talk about polar bear and go Google what color is a polar bear's fur and listen to scientists. Right? And by the way, an animal can have a recessive gene too. Can it not? Can an animal have a gene to where it has less melanin that can make it appear to look like it's white? Just like you can have vegetables that have recessive genes, right? And can make them look like they're white because they lack chlorophyll instead of melanin. Just like you can have a person that has recessive genes. People don't want to look this up, right? If somebody has blue eyes or green eyes, you think that's just the hue. That's not true. The reason why it shows up blue, green, and matter of fact, you've seen some people where it looks blue in one eye, green in the other, or you've seen some people where it looks like their eyes change colors as the light hits it. It depends on a lot of that depends on how much melanin is there, believe it or not. People don't want to talk about it, but do some research. It depends on how much melanin is there. A lot of people don't know that. So sometimes you're actually seeing further into somebody's eyes or seeing certain parts of the eye that reflects back a certain thing. You call it blue, you call it green. And people will say you're lying on that, but it's weird. The same people that say I'm lying on that will be the very same people who will say, well, energy is just or color is just coming from energy. The energy that does this moves this way and that way. But you don't believe that you can't see melanin. There's certain light that bounces off of energy in a different way. Just like you say the sky is not really blue, right? They tell you the sky is not really blue. It's just the way that the sun reflects to the atmosphere that makes you think that it's blue. But have it move slightly or something interesting happen with the atmosphere, and it can appear to be pink. It can appear to be something else. Well, the same thing's happening with your body. Why do you think that your body doesn't act like the earth? You said you don't care what color you came from as long as you care about your deeds. That's cool. I believe that every color that everybody has should be taken into effect, and that we should love all of you. That's what I believe. I believe that everything that's part of you, we should love it. We should love you for who you are. People say I love you for who you are, but stop talking about black or white. Why? So what about albinos? We already talked about that. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are. You cannot be alive if you're white. You have to have melanin. So by definition, you can't be white.
I find it ironic how many people say, I don't see color. Color doesn't exist. And the same people who fight to be white will tell you, why are you making everything about color? I don't see color.
And the president uses colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I guess if you only see white, you don't see color. If it's not.
Yeah. Or if you don't want to see color, then why don't you want to see color? Yeah. Like everybody. Look, I don't know. I've talked about this. This has become something that it wasn't, but hopefully those of you who actually came for what this was about and saw the other slides and actually heard about what we were talking about. at this point because I know I'm keeping this up and stuff, and this is way past my bedtime, in all honesty. So we were talking about nuance today, and the lack of it causes us to not have actual conversation. Right? Basically, that's where we are. Yep, I'm blackwashing because I'm saying that all of us should get over this whole thing of white that was created to separate us, and that we should all be human beings. If you want to call that blackwashing, then I'll do it all day, every day. Right? Sounds like you're more concerned with whitewashing rather than pulling us together. It's not a thing. People just say whatever. But hey, you know what? In the English language, people spell stuff all the time out. They use spells to try and manipulate and get people to believe whatever, as if there can even be a reverse racist. By the way, if you're still listening, you know there can't even be a such thing as a racist the way that you think, because a racist technically should be some, if you think that there's a such thing as a human race, if you know about Karl Linnaeus and others, you know that that's not a thing. Thank you. You know that's not really a thing. But if you think that the human race means that you're a great person, then if somebody's a racist, they should be proficient at their race, because IST on a word means you're proficient at it. A protagonist is proficient at being the person that's going to be positive in the thing, right? The antagonist is going to be proficient at being negative. A psychologist is proficient at studying your soul, or what you call psyche in the Greek. Psyche is psyche. That's Greek for soul, right? If you're dealing with a pianist, somebody who's proficient at playing the piano, a flautist, somebody proficient at playing the flute, et cetera, right? Well, if you're a racist, you should be proficient at the human race. So even when you talk about racist, once again, you're coming to somebody who doesn't get manipulated by what you want me to say the word means. It means what it means. It means what it means. It means what it means. Right? Like it is what it is, right? Like I don't. You want me to go into stuff because somebody in your culture says something must be this way, and I'm not going to do it anymore. You know why? I praise God that I found out nuance. You are meist, right? I found out something called nuance. There are details that many people are not willing to tell us, and if you won't tell it to us, there's no problem, because we can look up stuff for ourselves and we can determine what stuff is through a cultural prism. That doesn't have to be through one that anybody has to be beneath anybody else. No, Joel Quinn, the point that I'm making, you're only caught on one picture. The point that I've been making is that I'm not worried about what you want me to have to say, because I'm into nuance. And nuance tells the story, even if you don't want to listen to the story it tells, because many people are not into nuance. That's what I've been saying. Right? No matter what. See, you see my son right here? He's somebody who's learning nuance. So it's possible for him to learn that negative things have happened to his people, and at the same time him still know that he came from kings, because there's nuance. That also means that not everybody that looks like him should be trusted, because there's nuance. It also means that everybody that looks opposite of him is not necessarily evil, because there's nuance. Now, if for some reason that's difficult for you to see, then that's fine. But that's why this is not for everybody. I'm not trying to get everybody to agree. It is not my goal, nor is it a possibility that everybody who listens to anything that I say will always agree. But if you believe in basic humanity, why not at least listen to another human being? Why is your goal to be able to try and mute another human being? See, we have moderators that have to mute because y'all come on here and people have been calling me all types of curse words and racist things and all this stuff or whatever, and nobody cares, right? But then I simply say, well, maybe you're off on something that you were taught, and everybody attacks. But I didn't see the same energy. Now, some of you, granted, weren't on when people did some of it, just like you weren't on to hear the whole conversation and to see where it lies. But you're not worried about that, right? And I don't see the same energy that y'all are keeping for that, to make sure that you're making sure that you listen for us. And also that you'll come against the people who are saying negative things. Like some of you who are still attacking stuff have not even addressed or even looking for the people who came on here and said that because of the color of my skin, I must not have a father. Some of you have not once been like, hey, that person was wrong, but you were busy telling me that I don't know anything. Not one time do I remember Besides the people who muted the people, praise God for you. But not one time do I remember any of you guys, especially the naysayers, saying anything about the fact that somebody came on here and said, because of the color of my skin, that his grandfather, who he loved very much, can't be in his or my life because of the color of our skin. Not one time. So that's my question. Once again, you have more of a problem with seeing Romans were not white than you do with somebody saying that I must not have a father. You said, what does one have to do with the other? I don't know. Ask the people who made the statement. Ask the people on here who came and said something negative. Ask the people who came on here, saying that I don't know anything. Ask the people on here who said that, hey, the person who came on here earlier talking about black people are doing bad things. Hey, it makes sense to me. Ask them and go look for them and say, and keep the same energy that you have for me. Keep it for them. But many of you won't. You won't know why? Because there is no nuance. You'd rather the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So even if your enemy hates me because of how I look, and I'm simply telling you that none of us should consider ourselves to be anything other than our tribe, and then see how our tribes work together to make sure that we are human beings. You'd rather go with the racist than go with me. Because I disagree with something, you got to ask yourself, what's up? And that's lack of nuance. If you can't even look at that nuance, no wonder America's going down. And you're going to go right down with her, and you're going to go down shaking your fist toward the heavens as she goes underwater. But see this right here, right? I have to be strong and I have to be loving no matter what, because the second I start to attack you, he thinks it's okay to attack you. You see this, even in all this serious conversation going on, he's still making faces and stuff. You know why? Because he's still positive. He's still a child. He's still loving life. Even when you guys try to say stuff about his own father, his father has to be the one strong enough to take the slings and arrows so that he'll grow up to be better than his father ever was. Because he won't have to worry about something, because I'll take it on. As much as you think that I'm wrong, I'll take it on. Right? But it's very nuanced, as I said. But long story short, there's been a long live. There's been like a regular live session in the Horizon. But hopefully you those of you who've been listening the whole time, or a lot of the time, you got the gist of this. Like, hopefully you got the gist of this. That people don't want to listen to nuance at all. Oh, thank you, sir. People don't want to listen to nuance at all. And so since they don't want to listen to nuance at all, there's no way to reach them. But those of you who this was for, you've seen the reason why it's important to have these conversations. Those of you who've seen the nuance and you got it now, you've seen the reason to have these conversations. So I appreciate you. Thank you for listening in. We'll see you tomorrow on Kofi_43. If you're on TikTok, KOFI_OFORI, not the number 2, but the number 3. We'll be on at 8 a.m. Eastern New York time tomorrow, continuing our series, The System is Sus. And we'll be on tomorrow evening on this very same TikTok channel at 8 p.m. Eastern New York time. If you're on YouTube, we'll be on YouTube. We'll also be on the podcast. We'll also be on Facebook. And thank y'all for being on so long with me. I appreciate you. Those who had class tonight, I do apologize. I got into it tonight, and I didn't think about when time hit 9 o'clock. So I apologize. We got a makeup to do. A reminder to those that are going to be in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area on the border over there. We'll see you guys this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And we appreciate y'all so very much. We're continuing to pray for you, and we look forward to doing great things with you. And those of you who are part of what we do, even outside of just the live sessions and stuff, we're very appreciative of you guys so much. So you guys take care. Start to live in the nuance, because you can see how much just dealing with nuance is trying to get to the small things. Many people can't get there. And this is what I tell people a lot. They think that these live sessions, so y'all do some stuff outside the live sessions and we really get to go in on some of this stuff. A lot of people be thinking that we go really, really in depth on these live sessions. And a lot of times we're just surface level. Because people aren't ready to go into nuance. But prayerfully, you study the nuance. And by the way, anything that I said tonight, we say this all the time, please study it to show yourself approved, to bring it before Elohim, that you can be workmen, that needed not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, so you won't live in vanity, but you'll live in reality. All right. Thank y'all again. I appreciate you so much. Please check out my wife, the Honorable Maya, on TikTok, YouTube, or website, and Pinterest at Bloom and Flourish. Not A&D, the letter N, Bloom and Flourish. She is a healer, herbalist, chemist, and biologist by degree. Tincture of the month is still stinging nettle. And don't forget, family, we're looking at on Sunday. We're looking at the day of Pentecost, 4:00 p.m. Eastern New York time. Don't forget on Saturday, we got Shabbat Shalom podcast. I believe Minister Shantae is going to be filling in for us. And at Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern New York time, we're going to be having our Shabbat Beit Sefer, or Shabbat Ba'at Savar, our Shabbat school for our children at 11 a.m. Eastern New York time. So hopefully we'll have you join us there as well. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you. We honor you. To everybody else, as always, remember that you are loved, you're necessary, you are majestic, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and you, which is all of us working together, will be the reason why people who are in this system no longer have to be up. Shalom, family. Peace.